Good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 26, 2019 meeting of the Groton Town Council Committee of the Whole. All members are present with the exception of Councilor Baumgartner, who is on his way driving back from Hartford. Calendar and communications. Councilor Parker.
I received, I'll start with my calendar first. TVCCA, and I did attend their Mahon when everyone else attended, and I also attended a workshop by Hearing Youth Voices called Attended Schools That Work program, which was very interesting because we had different people from all over Connecticut plus New Hampshire talking about our school systems. And I received several emails regarding the New Ink Garden.
Councilor Franco.
I attended the Tax Incremental Financing Advisory meeting tonight, and I also received letters regarding the New Ink Garden, and I have them here that I'd like to hand them for the record.
Okay. I think, well, we'll see. Most of them have probably gone through the clerk as well, but I will make sure they're included with the minutes.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Councilor Heed.
I have nothing on my calendar for the past week, but I also received a number of emails from members of town. Most of the emails were in support of the garden, and then I also received a number of phone calls and had a number of conversations with people, most of which were not in favor of the garden. So it was a pretty even mix.
Okay. Councilor O'Brien.
I believe since our last council meeting, we had a beautification committee meeting that went very well. We're working on a program right now for a town-wide cleanup on April 27th. I also received a lot of emails and calls in reference to the No Ink Park, and that's about it. Excuse me.
Excuse me. I also received a lot of emails, which I guess were sent jointly to the council. They weren't to me individually, about the New Ink Gardens.
I also received several emails, mostly for and a couple against the New Ink Gardens.
Councilor Zafir.
I have no report this evening.
Report. Thank you. The same emails, I think, went to all 9 councilors and to Mr. Burt, so we all are in receipt of, the majority of the communications came from people in support of the garden, but I did, however, receive several that were in favor of selling the property. I wanted to commend Fitch High School, and they had an event this week called Action Week in conjunction with Sandy Hook Promise, and in particular they had a Choose to Include Day where they had events where they were starting out saying hello and just trying to have unified sports, unified dances, where every student in the school would feel like a part of the community, and it's a way that you bring the kids together and then you minimize feelings of being left out, and therefore it creates a better sense of community and it makes things safer for everybody in the school. So the kids at Fitch did a great job with that, and I commend them for that work. And there was a gong show at the senior center, which was a lot of fun. Councilor Baumgartner, do you have any communications for us, sir? Thank you for making it down from Hartford.
Yes, absolutely. Nothing to report, although I'm sure many of you received a plethora of correspondences from folks from either supporting or opposing what is to be done with the New Ink School Gardens, and I'm sure many of them are here today to speak with us and voice their concerns about potentially what the council will do moving forward. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them in the public hearings, during public hearings.
Okay, just for clarification purposes, there are no citizens petitions
public comments,
this evening,
public comments.
and there are no public comments this evening either. So the next opportunity for public comments would be at our regular council meeting, which is next Tuesday. So if you were waiting for the opportunity to speak, I'm sorry, but there is no opportunity this evening at the Committee of the Whole meeting. Okay. So we are on to, I'm sorry, did you have anything else, Councilor Baumgartner?
No, sorry, that was an oversight on my part. So.
That's fine.
Yep.
Approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Where are the minutes?
Previous week.
Previous week packet?
I think because it was just last week, there hasn't been time to do it, so that's just a heading that stays in there. There are
Okay.
minutes until the next PAL.
Great, so we'll skip that one.
You gotta keep you on your toes.
Yeah, right. All right, so 5 new business, and we are on to item 5A, 2019-38-1, 2019 golf rates. Councilor Baumgartner, would you read the motion, please?
Certainly. So I'll make a motion to recommend a resolution to authorize Shinnecock Golf staff to set the rates proposed to the council for the 2019 golf season. So moved.
Is there a second? Moved by Baumgartner, seconded by Franco. Good evening, gentlemen. If you could please make sure you use the microphones when you're speaking this evening so that it's captured for the people at home. If you could just introduce yourselves and then tell us what you would like us to do.
Is this working?
Try again, I think it is now.
Okay,
you go.
I'll try it again. Good evening, I'm Mark Berry, Director of Parks and Recreation. To my right is Eric Morrison, he's the superintendent of the golf course. And to his right is Todd Goodhue, who is the golf course pro. So we're here this evening to discuss the proposal for the 2019 Acrostic golf course rates. As you will notice on the sheet that you received of the rates, we are proposing a couple of changes, and I'm going to briefly discuss those changes and then open it up for questions. The first change that we're proposing is the adult membership, and our proposal to, and yes, you are reading that correctly, we are proposing to lower that rate a little bit. Our proposal to adjust the adult membership rate is based on looking at the average number of rounds divided by the total membership cost. The number of rounds needed to break even for a golfer's investment is an important consideration when deciding to purchase a membership. If the break-even number of rounds is higher than the number of rounds that they expect to play, there's really no incentive for them to sign up for a membership. The adult non-resident membership is the most expensive. As a result, it requires the greatest number of rounds in order to break even. Our proposal is to adjust the adult membership rates, which would reduce the cost per round, and making the adult membership provide more benefit for the membership. And our target range for new members as of implementing this change is 14 to 21 new members. We're also proposing an associate and an associate plus membership rate. The National Golf Foundation did a study, and 26% of the entire golf market is comprised of millennials. It's actually the second largest group of the entire golf market. While millennials are one of the largest markets, they don't play as much as that demographic did 20 years ago. And there's a number of factors that contribute to less play. Most significantly, it is money. Millennials ages 24 to 29 have the least financial cushion. To expand that group, the committee is proposing to establish an associate and an associate plus membership for adults ages 22 to 35. Currently, Shinnecock has 7 members that fall into that age range. We did look at what other golf courses in the region are doing, and they're discounting associate membership between 43 and 57%. By offering these discounts, we expect to increase the number of members between the ages of 22 and 35. And our target range for that, for new associate and associate plus memberships, is 7 to 10 new members. So the impact of what we're proposing is actually a net reduction in golf course membership revenue of about $18,000. However, if we hit our target, if we fall within our target range, we could see an increase of $26,000 to $38,000 in golf course membership revenue. The last proposal that we have is to move back the time of the limited memberships from 1 o'clock or 1 p.m. to 12 noon. So at this time, we're open to any questions that the council may have.
Okay. Councilors have questions? Councilor Aubrey?
Do you have any special pricing when people are doing fundraisers?
You mean like a tournament?
Yeah,
Yes, we do have tournament rates.
okay. And do you have golf club rentals?
Yes, we do have a number of sets of clubs that have been donated, and those are available for people to use.
Do you suppose the ones that are in the age where there's limited income really know that?
Probably not. I bet we could do a better job of advertising that, and we are planning on heavily marketing this new Associate Plus membership, and we're going to be utilizing the skills that our new Community Outreach Coordinator has. And we've already had a couple of discussions about what we're going to do, and tomorrow morning her fingers are going to be flying on the internet if the council approves the proposed changes.
I will tell you, I think she's going to do an excellent job. I've had the opportunity of meeting her, and she's just a little ball of fire.
That's how I would describe her, too.
Yeah. I think that if some of the younger people know that they could go and play and it wouldn't be that they had to have clubs, I think it would probably increase some of the membership.
Right, and that would just go towards reducing the overall cost of golf. And
I will say, I don't live on the golf course as I did before, but my stepdaughter does now, and you guys do a great job. You work very hard and really keep the golf course looking great, and I think the town can be very proud of what you do.
yeah, all the staff up there does an excellent job with the resources that they're given to manage the course.
I don't know
And-
about those two, but the rest
Well,
of them.
okay, yeah, I wasn't speaking about those two, but, no, the entire staff does an excellent job.
Yeah.
And we've been recognized by a number of regional magazines as providing a quality golf experience.
We have Councilor Heed and then Councilor Zepari.
Right now, there are no associate or associate plus or those discounts?
That's
on
correct. So
associates, is that
someone, once they turn 22, would pay the adult membership rate.
All right. Well, I understand the idea of discounting, and fencing it, that's what we do in hotels, so you're speaking my language. But how do you know, like you've said, basically you would reduce the net revenue by 14,000, all things being the same, but if you pick up the additional members that you think you'll get, you could end up netting 26 to 38,000 more.
That's correct.
Do you know how the other hotels, how the other golf courses are doing? Like, are these successful for them?
Oh, as far as the number of associate, I don't know. I'm not sure if Todd knows. I know we did, when we were making this decision, we did reach out to see what other courses were doing, but I'm not sure that that was one of the questions. But I feel pretty strongly that this is going to have a positive impact on the number of golfers within that bracket.
It could, as long as it's actually working at the other golf courses, then you know that it could work with us.
Right.
The only concern with dropping rates is once you drop them, it's hard to get back up. So if it doesn't work, what then?
Well, each year we manage the course to our revenue. So we make adjustments as the revenue's coming in, and we would do the same thing again this year if we did not see any increase in the number of memberships. We would have to tighten our belts and make decisions not to do things that we probably have done in the past in order to match expenses to revenue.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Zepari?
At the bottom of the page, it says the guest fee is available, fee discount applies to Groton residents, active military personnel and dependents, town of Groton employees, and limited members on weekends before 12 p.m., and guests of Shinnecock members. I'm wondering why you didn't include veterans in that category.
We do give that. Okay. So while it's not stated, we do offer that to veterans.
So that the veterans are offered the use of the course?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on the fact that the quality of work that they're doing at the golf course, and the fact that you are, an Audubon certified golf course, I believe?
Yes, we're certified Audubon Sanctuary.
Right, and
Yes.
they do their Wildlife Wednesdays, where they show you all the, excuse me?
There's a phone.
Okay. Could everybody please silence their phones? Thank you. But they show you the wildlife that is on the course and how they're managing things and taking an active role to be environmentally friendly there. And I just was wondering also if you could address, when I was at the Golf Advisory Board meeting, you talked extensively about eliminating the 20 play and the 10 play passes. And this might, the fact that those are going away may help you to sell some of those other memberships. If you could just explain that to the council, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Todd, do you want to explain that?
We've had that program, the 20-play card, which is actually 29-hole plays, which is a 10, 18-hole card for $325. After we've had like 4 years of this program, and we feel increasingly that we're competing with ourselves. There were 20 people of 68 that purchased that card last year, 20 who chose not to join, but rather go in with this 20-play card. And so we feel that we're competing against ourselves. And by eliminating that as an option, then we will increase the likelihood that they will join the club again.
And so the goal is to increase the actual members of the club.
Yes.
Right, by eliminating some of the discounts that we had previously offered.
Are there any other questions for the gentleman? Okay, seeing none, we will vote on 2019-38-1. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Zepari. I didn't
Were we
see.
going to do a motion? There is a motion here.
Yes,
Are we going to vote on it?
that's what I was just doing. I was calling for the vote now. It has been moved and seconded by Baumgartner and Franco.
Okay.
So I was just calling for the vote. If everyone is ready? Okay, so all those in favor of 2019-38-1, 2019 golf rate, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming out. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Mr. Barry, you are staying with us for the next one, correct?
I am, yes.
So we are on to item 5B, 2019-104, endorsement of state greenway designation on page 4. And do we have a motion? Here we do. Councilor Parker, please.
To recommend a resolution endorsing the nomination of the 3 proposed greenway designation, I so move.
Second?
Moved by Parker and seconded by Baumgartner. Hello. All right.
So I'm still Mark Berry, I'm still
Yeah.
the Director of Parks and Recreation. And this is Deb Jones, the Assistant Director of Planning and Development. And I asked Deb to attend in case there was any planning-related questions.
Great, thank you.
So I'm here this evening to propose that the town's council officially nominate 3 corridors, 3 greenways for state greenway designation. This nomination does require endorsement by the town council. The Planning Commission has identified several greenway corridors that meet the state's criteria for a greenway designation. Greenways were included in the 2016 Plan of Conservation Development. In fact, recommendation 2-11 in the 2016 POCD was to develop an action plan to establish, expand, and connect green belts and state greenways. The concept of a greenway designation is not new to Groton. In the 1990 Conservation Plan, Groton identified green breaks for the purpose of providing sectors of undeveloped land to preserve natural and scenic resources. The Parks and Recreation Department proposes to nominate 3 designated greenways, and you all have should have received a map in your packet. Recognition by, oh, you did not?
No, this is what I
Oh, I'm
requested,
sorry.
that you bring one out this
Okay,
evening.
I did, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry. So these were the three.
Please, thank you. Wait, everybody at home wants to hear too, so.
So these three colored lines were the designated greenways that appeared in the 2016 POCD. I've given them names in the POCD. They weren't named, but these are the exact areas that were identified in the 2016 POCD.
Can you tell us which ones are which, please?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So you have the Tri-Town,
Okay.
the GNS Trolley Trail, and the X-Town.
Well,
Crosstown.
those actually are trails that would tie in to the greenways. These three
Okay.
greenways, the blue is the Fishtown Brook
Fishtown Brook.
Greenway. The orange is the Great Brook
Great
Greenway.
Brook.
And I guess that's kind of a pink, the Mystic River Greenway.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the questions that I asked, and I'm sure that if I didn't explain this, someone from the council would ask, is what's the impact to the town by Greenway designation? Well, I asked the administrator, and she said that actually Greenway designation has no teeth, so there's no impact to town planning. By designating a greenway, it doesn't mean that there can no longer be any development along that greenway, and there's actually no cost to the town to have a greenway designation. Probably one of the primary benefits, at least from my perspective, is that you get, if you develop a project, particularly a trail project that's tied into a greenway, you get an extra 15 points on your grant application. So that's a positive. And we have applied for a couple of different grants through the state. And we were not able to capture those 15 points because we didn't have an officially designated greenway.
Okay. Did you want to add anything?
No, not at all. I think he's covered it. It's pretty much a no-brainer. There's no downside to this.
Okay. Are there any questions? Councilor Overy?
Let's have a question. Did you say that even if there's a greenway and somebody was doing a new subdivision, it would not be impacted by the greenway?
That's correct.
That's right.
So
Right.
would you move it accordingly on the land in order to keep it, but not have it somebody's yard?
That's right. These are not hard and fast boundaries on this map. It's just a general direction of where the greenway should go. So yeah, if a subdivision came in, we would certainly adjust it and make sure it fell within the open space.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Sapari and then Heath?
How wide a swath of land is involved with the greenway?
I'm not aware of any specific requirements that, it has to be 60 feet, it has to be greater than 60, but it can't be more than 200. I don't think there is, if you look at what the state considers a greenway or allows for a greenway, it's pretty open. One of the things they talk about is it could be located along a waterway, a man-made corridor, including an unused right-of-way, traditional trail routes or historic barge canals. So it's pretty open to interpretation.
All set? Councilor Heath and then Baumgartner.
A few months ago, I attended like a Southeastern Connecticut Trails conference. You were there. Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see the north to south because that's exactly what everybody was talking about, was interlinking the trails going north to south in such a way that people could use it as commuting. Because there are a lot of people who live towards the north who would like to come down towards EB, for example, and I find the yellow one, which I think is Great Brook, particularly interesting. Not sure how you would get that to fit along the side of the road. You know, in some places it's pretty tight.
Councilor Baumgartner.
What kind of protections are, what kind of protections are afforded to, you know, the areas that would be included in the Greenway? So perhaps maybe the opposite of what my colleague, Councilor Sapiri, asked.
So what kind of protections?
Yes, so if land were to be included in the Greenway, what protections would be in place for those properties? Would there be any whatsoever?
No,
No.
there would not be any.
No. I mean, if a particular parcel of land fell within a greenway and somebody came into, you know, the planning department and said, look, I'd like to build a cluster of houses there, there would be no restrictions as to the number of houses they could build based on the fact that it was designated as a greenway.
But certainly the Greenway designation would indicate that it is afforded that protection for a reason outside of it. I mean, I guess more so, it being a part of the Greenway should afford it some sort of, you know, ideally some sort of protection versus it being just sort of any other piece of land in Groton. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for the
Yeah,
planning
we-
department,
yeah.
but I'm assuming there would be some level of discussion, like perhaps you could orient the houses, you know, in a particular way, or rather than designating a particular parcel of open space to the town, you know, maybe we could do something in the back of the properties or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if that didn't work, like Deb said, you know, you'd have to make an adjustment within that undefined corridor.
Right, we treat this as a recommendation to be implemented through the subdivision approval. And that's where you'd get the protection if the open space fell around the Greenway.
Now, in terms of the point system, you know, to receive funding, grant funding for trails improvements, for example, there, in the notes here it says that, you know, you'll receive extra points, ideally extra points for having that designation. Are there any trails improvements in kind of the eye of the Parks and Rec Department that can be identified in sort of the short term that if we were to have this designation that, you know, we'd be able to?
Sure. We actually, a few months ago, submitted an application to the state to build a bridge up behind Cutler Middle School, and that would have completed the Crosstown Trail, which is a 6-mile trail, and that area would be considered part of one of these Greenway designations, and so we would have picked up an extra 15 points. So that's just one example recently.
That's great. And just last question, will this need approval from the City of Groton, considering the reservoir property? I know that will intersect with one of the Greenway designations, I believe.
That's
No,
actually what I was going to ask as well.
Yeah, it doesn't need private property owner approval. It's just because it's within the town, so it's only subject to the town.
Terrific. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, the yellow trail, I think you referred to it as the Fishtown Brook Trail. Is that the yellow one? It looks like it goes right across Groton Utilities property, just north of, is that Smith Reservoir, or whatever it's called? Looks like it goes right across. Right.
The Tri-Town?
Yeah,
The yellow one.
yeah, I think it's on the COP property boundary, the southern boundary. of the
You're
COP.
referring to this?
Swim for a little bit?
Yeah.
You're
So the
referring
reservoir,
to
Groton
this
Utilities
section
property.
here?
Right, that's
Yeah.
above Groton
That's the
Utilities?
It is. I think that's the COP property,
Okay.
or a portion of it is, yes.
All right, so it runs along 117 then pretty much?
And then,
And then
right,
across
yes.
the COP property? Oh, that's
Yes.
good. So then we don't have to worry about Groton Utilities then. Excellent. Okay. Anybody else with questions? Anybody else besides we go back to Councilor Robley? Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that if there was any way to do it, to have some kind of a sign across from the Marriott. I'm sure people coming into the area would really enjoy knowing where they could go, besides out of town. No.
Well,
And when a trail's developed there. sure.
Yeah, I mean, once the trail's developed,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that management of the Marriott has expressed an interest, previously had expressed an interest in seeing something developed, so it would give their guests an additional activity.
Right.
And, hopefully the Tri-Town Trail plan has been in place for a number of years, and, one of the proposed routes does go right across the street from the Marriott, and they're working on the northern portion of that now, and hopefully sometime in the future we'll be able to start the southern portion, or they will be able to start the southern portion of the Tri-Town Trail, and eventually we'll be able to connect the three communities.
Great, thank you.
Full disclosure, I'm not part of the management team that asked for that, just saying.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to note, we have a letter in our packet from, signed by Joan Smith, who's the president of the Groton Open Space Association, who is offering their support for this proposal, so.
Yeah, and you should also have a letter from the Tri-Town Trails in support of this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so this won't just benefit the town and Parks and Rec, it will also benefit open space groups if they're doing trail development that fall within this greenway.
Very good. Is there any other discussion? Councilor Franco?
So talking about marking the trails, will you mark all of the trails throughout town? Will you put markers up or just near the Marriott?
Well, we wouldn't, this is just a conceptual. I mean, there aren't necessarily existing trails within the greenways right now, but certainly as trails develop, we have been actively identifying public trails. You may have seen the signs. It's kind of a green patch with what looks like a trail going through it, and it does say Groton Public Trails, and we've put those on a lot of the trailheads throughout town that weren't previously identified. So as public trails develop, we would continue to identify those.
All right, thank you.
And we do have the letter here signed by Keith Parkinson on behalf of the Tri-Town Trail Association, also in support of this agenda item. Is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will vote. We are down to 8 counselors for this vote, as Councilor Saperi has stepped out for a moment. So all those in favor of 2019-104 endorsement of state greenway designation, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? So moved unanimously. That's 8 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention, with Saperi absent for that particular vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are on to item 5C, 2019-126 Economic Development Commission 2018 Annual Report, and this is on page 7. And there's no action required. I believe this is just informational, correct, Mr. Burt? Hello, welcome. If you guys could please use your mics again so that we can have it picked up for the viewing audience at home.
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm Catherine Young with the Groton Economic Development Commission, and to my right is Craig Mellon.
And I'm the current chair. Catherine is the outgoing chair. And Paige?
Paige Bronk, Economic and Community Development Manager.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to tell you what we've done over this past year and what we're planning for this current year. And our report is in your packet. So I'll just review the highlights, and if you have any questions, of course, we'd like to answer them this evening. The Commission, over the last few years, has established goals for each year that we attempt to accomplish, and that was the same for 2018. And our first goal was to support the work of the town OPDS. And so the primary thing to support the town, we decided, was the continuation of the ambassador program, and that was otherwise known as business outreach. And in addition, in supporting the town, We attended several meetings or activities to support economic development, including the zoning regulations rewrite meetings, the TIF Advisory Committee, which some of the commissioners sit on, and also the Groton Beautification, which we're excited has been established this past year. Also, in an effort to fully understand what the current efforts are regarding property development in the town, we requested a tour to go around and see these properties and hear from the town staff the significance and what their strategy was going to be regarding the properties. So we did go to the Mystic Education Center. We went to Center Groton. We went to Route 184 and the Gold Star Highway intersection, the Sealy School, the Thames Street redevelopment area, the Groton Heights Elementary, the Airport Industrial Park at Leonard Drive, and downtown Groton. Continuing on with support for the town efforts, previously we had attempted, in years past, we had attempted to go and visit various groups that are involved in some way with economic development, and with that, we were not able to always go as regularly as we'd like or to be able to report back. And so through an evolution of that process, we invited some of those organizations to come regularly to our meetings. And so this past year, it became more routine that they came, that they designated representatives, and also that they provided a written report when able at our monthly meetings in advance. So that was very helpful. And so now at this point, the U.S. Naval Submarine Base has a regular attendee, along with the Downtown Mystic Merchants Association, the Town Council, of course, and we appreciate the fact that you have two who come to our meetings on a very regular basis, and we appreciate that. The RTM, also the Greater Mystic Chamber of Commerce, and also the Groton Utilities. We also establish an orientation for EDC commissioners so that as new commissioners come on, they come up to speed very quickly with what our goals are. And in addition, we did invite Fitch High School to get involved with EDC on a regular basis, and that is a process that's ongoing. Our second goal, which was the second of three, is to grow the Economic Development Commission Business Outreach Visitation Program. And that was based on the work initially that came out of the market trends analysis that was done a few years ago. And OPDS said that that would be the most helpful to their work. So we enhanced the program in a few different ways, and primarily we had a calling card, which we started with, and then we evolved it into a new card. And I hope that each one of you have a chance to take a look at this card, which is what we use to introduce ourselves when we go to the various businesses, and we encourage them, the businesses, to actually go on the website, the new website that the Planning and Development Office established this year, which we're very excited about, and also to subscribe and get the monthly newsletters. So that is the purpose of this calling card. And in addition, we are starting something new, which Craig will talk more about, but the idea is not only to give them a card, but to leave the business with a copy of their card. We visited 55 businesses in 2018, which was a tremendous improvement from the previous year and a half. And that was, again, an evolution of the process. However, we were disappointed in ourselves that we did not visit more businesses in that period of time. And so we've come up with a few strategies to add to the number of people who are actually doing business outreach. And Craig will talk more about that. Also, this past year, thanks to the leadership of Paige being on the board of the Connecticut Economic Development Association, we became members, the EDC became members, and so we do receive regular emails about what's going on around the state, and we understand what other towns are doing. regarding economic development. And finally, our third goal was to initiate something new, which was to have a specific effort toward collaboration and partnerships with other organizations locally that are focused on economic development. And part of that is we had some guest speakers that came from organizations that actually are involved in economic development either regularly or indirectly, and that included, for example, sector and others. So with that, I'll turn it over to Craig.
Okay, so as we're moving forward to next year and our goals, clearly all of what we're doing is to actively support the town of Groton OPDS, and that's our primary purpose. So then it was, what are the goals to help achieve that? And the first comes to the business outreach. On business outreach, we were, as Catherine said, disappointed in ourselves that we had only reached out to 55 businesses, because every time we do that, the business winds up saying thank you, and this helps us, and it sort of builds the rapport of the town with the business community. So we set for ourselves what we now believe to be a realistic goal of 200 for this year. The Card for Card program is a significant part of that. The outreach team tested that and found that it was much easier to go in with something that helped people to see what it is we were about, and if they didn't have a lot of time, to leave a card that they could then come back with questions on. And so it facilitated an easier transaction, and we think that will help a lot. And the idea of also having volunteers who might also help us in that, we believe will hit this goal, and I think that will just help build the relationship between the town and the businesses as we go forward. The second piece that Catherine talked about was collaboration with others. And this one's kind of interesting. If you look at what EB, with the major growth they've got going, what they wind up doing is everyone wants a piece of EB, so everybody goes to EB individually, talks to them, they hear the same thing from EB. EB says, well, I guess I have to tell them the same story that I told everybody else, and people come asking for things. And if you're going to build a region that's going to support EB, it seemed to us it was time to look at whether the region might work together more in terms of the business development. So we put out some invitations to 3 or 4 other communities, as well as to Sector and to the Eastern Connecticut Chamber. And what we found was that they all saw the same thing and were hearing the same thing from EB, Pfizer, in fact, as well. That we can talk to each of you individually, but we're not necessarily advancing things in the same way that we might if the whole region were pulling together to make this happen. So we paged his contacts, really, his counterparts in all of the other communities, pulled together a meeting, and on short notice, every community, which included the town of Groton, the city of Groton, Stonington, North Stonington, New London, and Norwich was added by others in the group. Everyone sent representatives, at least one, usually 2 or 3, along with representatives from Sector and from the Eastern Connecticut Chamber. We met together without EB to say, how do we change the story and change the dynamic so that we're actually making progress, helping EB, and not sort of going like supplicants to sort of ask, what can you do for us, and so on. And we found that we all had insight that we could shape and actually put in front of EB to say, here's what we think is happening, do we have it right, what else could we be doing, here's some thoughts that we have. We then had a meeting with leadership from EB, and sure enough, we described exactly what they were experiencing, and they loved the idea of having one-stop shopping, a regional group that would work with them. And we see this as a rising tide raises all ships. If we can make this an area that is really attractive for recruitment and retention of employees, where EB has people who are coming in and then some of them are leaving again, or how do they actually attract people who want to stay? They get lots and lots and lots of applicants, and they choose some, but whether they stay or not is in part based upon the experience at EB, and in part based upon their experience being in our community. How do we help the retention, and how do we also deal with, there are a number of people who are retiring, and are they going to live here, and what are they looking for, and how does that whole transition work? What we found in a meeting with EB was a phenomenal rapport and trust that allows us to now ask for additional information from EB in a collaborative way. they're indicating interest in sharing it, and we in turn are going to be using that forum carefully to make sure we build the trust. But I'd say, based on the one meeting we did have with EB once we've done this, it's off to a great start, and we have a framework, and the framework is, let's look at where we are, let's look at where we want to be, let's look at what we need to be where we want to be rather than looking at next steps. So instead of little incremental changes, let's take the steps that will help us to be a region that supports the employment of the businesses in this community. And that even in the meeting with EB, the discussion was, you know, this also applies to Pfizer, it also applies to others. We ought to be looking at how to do this more regionally in general. And so we're real pleased with the kickoff on this. And at that point, I think, Paige, if you have anything to add, otherwise I'd open it up to questions or thoughts.
Are there questions or comments for, okay, we have Councilor Schmidt and Councilor Atwater.
I just wanted to thank you for your diligence and all of your many, many efforts to promote Groton, and I for one am very impressed with everything that you do too. But also, I learned a new word in your report, which was a good report, but I'm sure that all that you do will be redounding to Groton in the very near future.
Sorry about that.
Councilor Atwater.
Councilor Schmidt just took my thunder. I did not know what redounding was, and I've been trying to figure it out and trying to figure it out. I did want to say that I commend you going from 20 visits in the last 2 years or year and a half to 55 is I think is a terrific job, and I wish you well on going to your 200.
Councilor Franco.
Well, as a liaison, I come to your meetings, and I've been coming for past year or so. I love the new card. I love it, and I love that it says supporting your business is our business. I think that's great, and I think you came up with a better idea than going in with the checkoff list that you had before. And like as it's been discussed, this is something that never ends. It's not like after you go to all the businesses, you're done. You keep going and trying to make a relationship with them and let them know that the town is there for them. And I think everything you're doing with the business outreach has been just absolutely wonderful, how you've progressed it. So thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Aubrey.
Supporting your business is our business. We should recognize the fact that Susan, what's Susan's last name?
Colin?
Dowling?
On your committee came up with that.
Susan Dowling.
When we were working on this originally. I'm just wondering if maybe we're duplicating a little bit of what C.O.W. does?
Based on the meeting that we had, I think there are lots of organizations that are all doing some similar things, and everybody's doing it independently. And what we found was that by all of us talking together, we can actually do things in a concerted way. That said, I think there's a lot of interest in sector's part in taking a leadership and helping to coordinate what we're doing. Pleased that we kicked it off. It's great, I think, for the town of Groton that we saw this opportunity for everybody to really work together and be in the same room together and share the discussions with EB or other major employers so that they have one place to go and they can actually get answers and work done rather than otherwise. The C.O.W. or any of the other organizations, they can't tell us what to do. We actually wind up coming to them and saying, here it is, it's going, and now let's see if you can't help us to take it to a next level. So we don't see it as the responsibility of the town of Groton to establish a regional process that becomes the regional entity for the community. We thought it is our role to get it going and make it work, and then help the regional organizations to help us succeed.
Paige?
Just to follow up on that, I think that it's been successful. We didn't envision that it would actually be this large to start. We started in thinking what adjacent municipalities would have some natural synergies, and we reached out to them, and many of them said, hey, if you're going to meet, I want to have this group, I want to have this group, and it's become this big. Sector has been at the table, and Nancy Kauser indicated that she is interested in definitely helping us lead this in the future. I think that we probably envision a handoff of logistics moving forward, but jump-starting it, I think, was our role. It hadn't been done yet, and now that it's advancing, I do believe it's a regional entity that would manage it moving forward.
Well, I hope it works well. My concern is the fact that C.O.W. represents all the different towns in the area, and I know that they meet periodically with the businesses in the area, and I hope you'll coordinate with them so that we're not doing an overlap.
I think we're open to any regional participation. In my mind, this is very simple, but sector deals with regional economics. C.O.W. typically deals with transportation and many planning items on the regional level, but I think there's probably room at the table for both. So I might suggest to Nancy that she coordinate with the C.O.W. as well to make sure that all parties are involved.
Just one comment also that about 2 years ago, the sector and the C.O.W. created or was responsible for the same area and region of towns, so that will work well.
We have Councilor Heed and then Baumgartner.
Commendation and then a question. These cards are great, and the website's really, really great, especially the video that you have that's on there. But it has all kinds of information. I think it's a great way to market the town. And actually went to dinner with Councilor Franco a few weeks ago, and we're talking to our server who was talking about wanting to open a restaurant, and he was looking at Westerly. Well, she reached right in her purse, brought this out, and it was the beginning of a 35-minute sales pitch on Groton. So, kudos to you. I hope he comes here. So I'm wondering, because I don't see these with other towns. I don't see the website on them. Not that I've probably looked that much. I've looked at towns where I've lived before. Do we know what the return is on this? Like, are we seeing a lot of hits and a lot of questions coming about because of the cards or the websites?
The short answer is yes. But I think what we try to do in our monthly reports is provide some metrics regarding website activity. Did we land a big fish as a result of the website? That's more difficult to actually measure, but most of our metrics are going up. And when we talk to investors in the development community, they all have mentioned they've gone to the website. That's where they go for information. And I think broader, in combination with all of the marketing materials we do, that's just one more tool in the toolbox. We have hard copy material, digital material. We advertise in the New England Real Estate Journal and other magazines. So we're trying to do somewhat of a comprehensive marketing, and the website's just one part of the full package.
If I could comment, you all have put a lot of resources into economic development for the town, and I think what we're seeing is it's paying off. The cards, we are an Economic Development Commission, but staff ultimately have the skills because there are people with talent who could put it together and make it happen. So I think what you're really seeing is the continuation of more and more happening because you made a commitment to make it happen. It's our job to help make that happen, and that's what I think is happening here.
The other thing is that these cards are to target business retention and expansion, which is a smaller piece of the pie in addition to all the work that our town does regarding new attracting business and property development.
Is that it?
Yes.
Councilor Baumgartner?
So thank you for the dinner party invitation, Councilor Heath. Only being facetious. Two quick questions. So the Economic Assistance Fund, I know it's been very helpful in terms of recruiting businesses here, and I know it'll be utilized for that and potentially the retention of businesses if they're looking to grow. In your eye, what are ways that the town can better leverage that fund, perhaps support it with town resources, or in a way that it can become sort of self-sustaining in the future?
At the moment, we've had reserve funds in that account to accommodate all of our requests to date. I would say we manage that the best we can so that the money can last as long as possible. Just a little backdrop, typically when someone makes an application, it's a big ask, and we encourage them to do so because it helps us understand the full picture of the project. Staff will kind of whittle the application down. We focus on what we consider to be more the public infrastructure components rather than something that would be exclusively on the private property. So ultimately, what we're comfortable with is a fraction of what they initially request. And then the EDC, with their committee, they actually will look at it and scrutinize a little bit further. So when we get to the council with a particular recommendation, it has been filtered, it has been polished, and it's the best it can be. So that's part of it to begin with. To your question about trying to leverage it so that it's more self-sustainable, I think basically the funds that we provide for these projects are projects that are contributing to our grant list. Just one small guideline is we're not allowed to even recommend an award that's higher than 2 times what the annual taxes would be post-improvement. So we're kind of capped. So if you look at it somewhat in terms of seed money, we're giving them something so that they actually are going to pay us back over time. As a result of that grant with the Economic Assistance Fund, you're receiving significantly more tax money than you would have if that project didn't happen. So I think that's the best answer I could provide. I don't know that it would leverage any additional funds to be contributed, and we may come back to the council in the future needing to replenish that. But I think it's been well managed, and I think it directly has contributed to increased grand list revenues.
Mr. Burt wanted to add something.
Just to mention, we have that property review committee that's meeting on different properties. One of the things we've been discussing is potentially, like when we have something like the Groton Heights property sale, that maybe a portion of that goes back into the Economic Development Fund for things like, it could be remediation also, it could be, helping tear down a building. So doing some things with those funds as we develop properties, so more to come.
And can any of the TIF increased revenue go into the Economic Assistance Fund?
Well, the way it's set up now, my understanding is 50% will go to the general fund, 50% in the economic, the TIF fund. You can always choose to move funds out later, but then initially that's how the spread is. Of course, you can do what you want with it, especially once it goes to the general fund.
Okay.
Right.
Councilor Aubrey.
Well, of course, I'm very fond of the EDC committee. I've been part of it for years, and I can tell you it has developed into a much better organization. For many, many years, we didn't accomplish a darn thing. But with the leadership of the last few years and the leadership on the part of Paige and the people that work with him, it's just made an enormous difference. And you can be very proud of what you've accomplished. And we'll try to support you at budget time.
Thank you. Councilor Baumgartner?
I did have one last question. We talked about having, in the past, a more siloed approach to dealing with or interacting with businesses. The siloed approach coming more so from the part of the towns and the various entities that deal with economic development, ranging from sector to the Council of Government. So, in your eye, what are some of those things or asks, tangible asks and deliverables that there should be collaboration on? I know probably one thing would be transportation. In many ways, I know down in Mystic, for example, there are a lot of folks who have called for a Shoreline East train extension so that folks can take the train going into New Haven from Mystic, and certainly the airport, which is a great asset. Certainly there's no shortage of possibilities of having increased commercial flights out of there, and certainly with TIF, mixed use, and how that could kind of, especially now with a a demand for walkable communities and, you know, an appetite for both young people and older people, empty nesters, to, you know, be able to walk to, you know, coffee shops and whatnot. So, yes, what are some of your thoughts on that?
I think you're a little bit ahead of us, and by that I mean, for the first time we really have rapport with EB and access to their employees to ask what will really work versus not. And for example, talking about transportation, we could guess about what millennials might want. They'd wind up telling us, gee, they all like to drive and none of them want to take transportation. So I think there's some real value in the level of discussion that we're having now that will help us to answer your question much better at a later date after we have the discussions that allow us to interact and come back to you with, now we really know what might work. We need your help to do that. And we will come to you for that.
So stay tuned.
Mr. Brock and then Councilor Aubrey.
I have some information I'd like to share. It isn't necessarily as a result of our collaboration, but we're in constant communication with a lot of businesses, EB, developers, and then if you integrate some of the things that we learned from the market analysis, you hear John Reiner mention a lot of times that we need to focus on our sense of place. And people say, well, what are you talking about? We have a high quality of life in Groton. Well, that's true, but we're not yet to the standard of having a high sense of place. It's not a community that millennials naturally gravitate towards. It doesn't have that attraction yet. And you mentioned like coffee shops and things like that. There's not necessarily a formula on how you get there, but we have to make it a place that is well recognized to people outside of our area as the go-to place, to some degree, the same way that Mystic has their brand. And we think that housing is a part of that, transportation. We already have the affordability to some degree, we have the jobs, but it's gotta have more of an attraction, and I think that's what we're trying to move towards. And the housing, the transportation, and the jobs, that'll be a part of that mix.
Thank you.
And back to Councilor Aubrey.
I was just going to mention, EB did a survey, and I hope they share that with you because that gave a lot of insight into what they were looking for, you know, all the different ages. I think they did that about a year ago.
And they've indicated they're learning from that as well, and even their views are changing a bit. And then I think if there was one concept that came across from our meeting with EB, it was that most communities embrace college education. We have one of the most remarkable employers in town who has a guarantee that there's going to be more employment coming over the next 20 to 30 years because of the federal government. How do we raise the bar on the community's interest and cultural support for manufacturing as another path? And that's something that, again, might need to be regional, not just local, but those are the kinds of things that are coming up as we're in discussion.
Very good. Do any other councilors have questions or comments? Good. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Thank you, and thanks to the two counselors who join us. Your input actually helps us to do a much better job.
All right, Councilor Aubrey and Councilor Franco.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out this evening.
Thank you.
And we don't need any action on that, so we are on to item 5D, 2018-224-1, Conservation Commission Single-Use Plastic Study Report. And I don't remember, did we leave off with Councilor Parker or Councilor Franco? And this is on page 14, please.
The Town Council will direct the Commission or other appropriate town body as to how to proceed with the topic moving forward.
Okay, so we don't really need to move. Thank you for introducing it for us, though. So this evening, Mr. Reiner is here, and then if the other two gentlemen can just give their name before they start. We have a presentation for us. Yes, thank you.
So good evening, John Reiner, Director of Planning and Development. I'm actually just going to hand this off to the Conservation Commission. They were going to do this presentation and recommendation to you, but I did just want to remind the Council, back in August, you'd asked us to look at the subject of single-use plastic bags And the Conservation Commission, along with staff, has been spending a fair amount of time on this, and they have a presentation they wanted to give to you tonight.
Great.
Just got to get this projector working, and we'll be good to go.
Good evening. My name is Barry Rafferty, and I'm the chair of the Conservation Commission.
Larry Dunn, the vice chair.
Good evening. Our presentation, our whole presentation is in your packet, but what I'd like to do this evening in our brief presentation is just go over the highlights of it, and particularly in the findings, the recommendations, and then the town-wide survey that we did in regards to single-use plastics. So the topic tonight is our single-use bags that everybody's familiar with. You go to the grocery store, you go to anywhere, and here's these little bags. And our issue with this is that the number of the bags that have been used are now getting out into the wrong places, which are the environment that's out there, and consequently it's raising a lot of problems. And I appreciate the council giving the Conservation Commission an opportunity to look into this and the opportunity to present tonight. I'd also like to thank the conservation members for all the volunteer hours that they did to put this together, and also I'd like to thank the town planning department, especially Bruce Lufkin, who helped out with a lot of the efforts with our online questionnaire that we had sent out. So single-use plastics are used every day. We're familiar with them as milk containers, soda bottles, medicine containers, water bottles, straws, plastic bags. All of these plastics have a single use and are discarded out into the waste stream once we're done with it. Those plastics not recycled, so a lot of the things I just mentioned are recycled and pulled out of the waste stream, but there's a number of things that aren't recycled that are still plastic and frequently escape that waste stream. And once they do that, they become an environmental problem. This is a report about single-use plastic bags that are difficult to dispose of once used and have become an environmental issue. So we're going to begin with our findings about single-use plastics. And one of the first questions the council was asking us is whether or not there's an ordinance, for instance, within the town that we could dovetail this concern into and then act out of it. And the answer is no. There are two ordinances currently right now. One is about litter, which is mostly what you find along the roadside. And the second one is recycling, which is just pulling out those things such as what the state has mandated, that when we dispose of our garbage, we're required to separate out bottles, cans, newspapers, and cardboard, and they all have a place to go now. But single-use plastics, especially the plastic bag, does not. We did a survey of residents and businesses in town to see whether or not sort of a litmus test, are people concerned about single-use plastics that are out there, including businesses within the town of Groton. Are they concerned about if a change was made and put upon them to change the way of doing business? Would they be proactive about that and support the efforts? And from our survey, we found very strong support on reducing the use of single-use plastics. And the last is that when we did our survey, one of the surprising factors was within the survey it said if there was an opportunity for the town to establish a working body in which they would look at a future ordinance that would look at the use of plastic bags within our town, would you be willing to volunteer your time to sit on that committee to have input? And out of our survey, we found we had over 100 people who responded back to say, yes, I would like to be involved in this. And by the way, this is my contact information. So there is a lot of support out there to address the problem of single-use plastics with us. One of the things we also did was to look to the state of Connecticut. Is there some guidance about where we could come back to the town and say, this is what the state is doing, this is what the state is thinking. And we found not much is going on at the state level. So over the years, many people have put in bills to respond to single-use plastics, and they have not made it out of the legislative session. This year, there are 18 bills now sitting before the state legislature to be acted upon, and we have no idea how many are actually going to make it all the way through this year. Our new governor has, in his budget proposal, has also suggested that maybe we put on a 10-cent tax on each plastic bag, perhaps as a way of controlling the uses of it. Many of the communities in the state have been very frustrated by the lack of activity in looking at the removal and the reduction and possibly banning of single-use plastics, so that it doesn't become the environmental problem that it has. And not seeing any action that's taking place at the state, have decided to take their own action locally. And so currently there's about a half a dozen towns that have already implemented bans on single-use plastics. Most of the towns right now are in the western part of the state. But there are many towns that are starting this discussion, and the town of Stonington and the town of Westerly are much further advanced in this program than we are, and they're about to put forth and implement a program in their towns on implementing the reduction of single-use plastics. The one thing that we're going to suggest, one of our strong recommendations is that the council would further pursue this, the reduction of single-use plastics by forming a group, some sort of ad hoc committee. And one of the things that came out of our discussions on the commission is that currently right now, reducing the individual use of single-use plastics is being done by community. And we looked at some of their ordinances and found that they're not all the same. And consequently, what's happening right now in piecemeal fashion is that as far as the businesses are concerned, if I have a multiple town business, a large box store, and I'm in lots of different towns, that means that I'm now following different rules in each different town, and that could have a detrimental impact on that business. So one of the things the Conservation Commission suggests is that as the town might consider developing their own policy as far as reducing single-use plastics, but they also talk about other towns that are next to us. What is Stonington about to do? What about Montville? What about the city of Groton, New London? And maybe approach this from a regional standpoint, so that regionally we're all on the same page and we collectively come together to all come up with their own town's ordinances. And so that when a business comes in, if they're in multiple locations, the same format is put on them as from, let's say, the Groton, whatever is Groton doing, New London's doing the same, and so everybody knows how the rules are played, and it's on an even playing field. The Conservation Commission biggest recommendation about the study of single-use plastics is that for the council to move ahead by perhaps forming another committee, and on this ad hoc committee, and within that committee we'd suggest that there are business people who have, from our surveys, who would be interested in being on this, as well as residents in the town of Groton from the responses that we got. That committee then would formulate a new ordinance for you so that we could implement some sort of declaration about a reduction of single-use plastics, so that by reducing the amount of single-use plastics in the environment, in our environment, hopefully that means there's less that go out into the environment and become problems out there. We also are looking at, besides plastic bags, that perhaps the first time you form an ordinance, you also may suggest substituting plastic straws, that there are alternatives to plastic straws, and plastic straws are another single-use plastic. And so besides plastic bags, also straws might be included in the first effort. Then let's say if the first time the ordinance is implemented, it's done on just single-use plastic bags and straws, that they might later on then expand and look at other types of plastics, like plastic cups, coffee cups, and things like that. Are there substitutes out there that aren't, so that once they're used, they're easier to get rid of at the other end. We also think that there ought to be an important educational component, that there should be some sort of an effort made to get the word out to the businesses of our town as well as the residents of our town about the issue of single-use plastics. That if the council finds that it is a problem and they'd like to act in trying to remediate the problem, to let our citizens know that we're addressing this, we think it's a problem for the following reasons, and we are directing ourselves in this direction, and we're asking our merchants and our businesses to change the way of doing things for the following reasons. And that educational effort then would help not only the businesses but also the residents understand what the procedure is in our town. So in the survey that we sent out, so toward the end of our 6-month period of time that the council gave us to put together this report, members said that, you know, what we ought to do is go out and get a litmus test from the residents and the businesses within the town. And so we started at the beginning of December and had on the town's website a place where you could go to take this very short survey on your thoughts about single-use plastics. We had, and then in the beginning of January, we closed down the website and then took a look at the data that came forth. We had a total of 480 responses to our inquiries and our survey. 14%, or roughly 68%, were businesses, and the other 86% were residents. On the businesses, oftentimes, a lot of times they didn't have an opportunity to, we knew, to actually respond to something on the website, a questionnaire about it. So we actually had members of the Conservation Commission print out a hard copy, a clipboard, and put some leather shoes on, and off they went and actually went into the businesses to talk to the people that were really operating those businesses and to get firsthand responses on our questions about single-use plastics. The outgrowth of that is the following. Do you use single-use disposable plastics such as straws or plastic bags? And this was asked both to the residents as well as to the businesses. And the interesting thing is the largest category of people who do not use single-use plastics at all were businesses. There are businesses in town who do require to use containers to serve food, and they've already moved on away from plastics. And so in our survey, 32% said none at all as far as the use of straws of plastics. The rest of the graph suggests that the rest of us, mostly residents, have not made that switch yet. And simply because it's so convenient for us right now to go into the stores and we're presented with single-use plastic bags for our goods and with plastic straws still, we come with our sodas, for instance, and we don't have an alternative to request when we go in. So we still haven't changed yet. How would you support businesses reducing single-use disposable plastics? And very positive support for businesses to make a switch over to single-use the reduction of single-use plastics and coming up with alternatives. Would businesses in the town receive goodwill by reducing single-use plastics? And here again, we had a very positive, strongly agreed to this, that businesses would receive a good feeling from their customers because they've gone green, if you will. How committed to reducing single-use plastics are both businesses and residents, and a lot of people came back to say that they're very positive about this and they're willing to make that switch. Would you participate with the town in developing a plan to reduce single-use plastics? And by and large, the data on the graph suggests that yes, there are lots of people that would like to see this shift. And as we mentioned, there were over 100 people who on the survey actually signed it with their name and gave us contact information to say that if this thing ever moved forward, we would collectively like to be part of the process of developing a program to reduce single-use plastics. And finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about one particular player that is really the subject of tonight's conversation, and that is the single-use plastic bag. And there's a whole bunch of data up here, and let me just walk through a little bit of it for you. So within the United States, we're using 100 billion single-use plastic bags every year. And the data suggests that means that each person, doesn't matter what age, gets to use 1,500 bags per year. And that's how many bags that are out there. Of all of those bags, once we've used them, currently 1% to 3% are recycled. That means all the rest of them are going into the waste stream to get rid of. The problem is the plastic that it's made up of is very difficult at this point to find a secondary use for it. There's one niche market right now that is using single-use plastic bags in their new product, but the amount of single-use plastic bags out there they've been able to get without doing much advertising and for that particular product. But the problem is that there are so many bags out there and there's nobody out there clamoring for them. The plastic bag usage, I thought this was interesting, is that when you go to a grocery store, you go to a clothing store, you go to the hardware store, you purchase items. You walk out to the cash register, you pay for them. Very conveniently, at that point, you're introduced to your first plastic bag, or many bags, depending on how many objects you have. But you walk out of the store, they've conveniently given you a bag to carry whatever products you've just purchased. And depending on how, if you've bought a lot of groceries and you're just using those single-use plastic bags, you get a lot of bags to go with you. Your relationship with that bag lasts 12 minutes. That means that it goes from the cash register to your car, from your car to your home or your business. You unpack the bag, you're done with it. Now, what happens to it? The problem is that particular bag makes it out into the environment. We see it along streets, we see it floating in the water, and that it lasts well over hundreds of years as life continues. The longer it's out in the environment, it doesn't disintegrate, but it doesn't decompose, instead it disintegrates, meaning that over time, under UV light, the bag breaks apart out in the environment and it becomes very brittle, and it breaks up into tiny little particles. And now people are finally recognizing that these tiny little particles are called microplastics, nanoparticles. And as that plastic bag breaks down, it doesn't disappear. It just goes into a different form, which are these tiny little microscopic plastic particles of the bag. And it remains out there for hundreds of years. that some of the chemistry in the bag changes, and that chemistry then, if it's ingested by a small organism, it becomes detrimental to the organism. So if these small organisms are now starting to feed on these things because there are particles that are out there right next to their regular food source, they don't know the difference, they don't know this is plastic, you don't eat it, they can't make that choice, they just go ahead and consume it, and then it breaks into the food chain. And as it breaks into the food chain, it works its way up the food chain to us. And so that means that through these microorganisms feeding on things, eventually we feed on parts of the food chain where then it gets incorporated into our system. And what we don't know at this time, what is the long-term effect by our consuming these microplastics? They're out there in the oceans. They're ubiquitous everywhere, and there's no easy way to remove them as a result of that. So one of the last facts about this that the city of San Francisco came up with is that for each one of these disposable or reusable, single-source plastic bags, it costs roughly the company that's making these things, it's costing, who provide them, a cent a bag. So each one of the bags, when you go to a grocery store, each one they're handing you, it costs them roughly a cent. Once you've used it, it no longer has anything to do with that store. It no longer has anything to do with the manufacturer. Now it becomes part of the waste stream. In this case in San Francisco, they found that once it hits the waste stream, single-use plastic bags are now costing 17 cents a piece to get rid of. So that means in our community here in Groton that we are paying extra money in our waste disposal system. We don't see it, that's obvious, but it is costing us more than 1 cent to dispose of this particular bag. And consequently, it's one of those hidden costs that, you say, well, so what? Why do we want to reduce the use of single-use plastics? Why do we want to perhaps put a ban on them and use alternative types of bags? That's one of the reasons that it's actually an extra cost in the waste disposal area of that. In closing, developing our recommendations to the council is to develop an ordinance to reduce the ban the use of single-use plastics. In this case, we suggest starting with plastic bags and plastic straws. Form a working group to help formulate the ordinance that includes both town residents as well as our local Groton businesses who've shown interest in participating in this process. Design an effective education outreach program about single-use plastics that includes the town's needs. Why is the town becoming involved with single-use plastic bags? And if the council so decides to reduce the use of these, why are we doing this? And getting those words out to the public to know why there's a change that's taking place. In the future, you also expand the programs to reduce other single-use plastics from there. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. That was very informative. Councilor Zafari.
You mentioned that there are other towns nearby with ordinances, and very wisely you said we should try to parallel those ordinances so that businesses don't have to comply with different rules in different local areas. Have you attempted to collect those ordinances?
We've looked at them, and we do have copies of them, but we have not actually sat down and compared line by line. But we know that they're out there.
Could you get them to us?
Yes.
I mean, we can look them up and find them, but if you've already got them, it might save us a little legwork.
Yes, we can do
Just going on, if you go in the grocery store, it's not the single-use plastic, it's not only the single-use plastic bag, you go down to the cold cut section and everything's in a little plastic packet. I bought some batteries and they come in a little plastic case, flashlight batteries. I recently got a package delivered from from Walmart, the mail section, the online marketing section of Walmart, and it came in a big box, much bigger than the stuff I ordered, and they put in it all these little plastic bubbles that are just going to be thrown away. I mean, it's a problem that is enormous. I would support, if we can do something reasonable in the short term, I personally would support it. I think you've done a marvelous job on presenting this study. The other comment I would make is that Eric Severide once said, and it was Severide's law, most problems come from solutions to other problems. And I'm old enough to remember when we were concerned about our cutting down too many trees to make paper. And the plastic bags arose so that we would consume less paper and save our forests. So there are, it had something to do with it at that time. But I think now we were using the plastic bags and the plastic packaging enough that it's created another enormous problem. And I think you've done a splendid job in focusing us on the extent of that problem. Thank you.
I believe Stonington is looking at theirs this week, so we should be seeing something in the paper as to where they're headed with this, so we can watch for that. We have Councilor Heed, Baumgartner, and then Franco.
I also want to thank you for the hours and hours of time that you've devoted to this, and having attended a few of your meetings, I'll commend you on the level. It was way, way above what I was expecting, so it's excellent. I did have a few questions, though. By the way, this is an irony, but my water bottle is at an Irish bar in Boston, so this is temporary. So when it comes to the companies that responded, I was wondering, were any of them like the big box stores, like Dunkin' Donuts, Walmart?
Yeah, the big box stores, because it's a national issue in California from a state has already banned it, they've moved in that direction. And so when we said from the survey, plus over a third of the business are already there, right? And over 60% say, we want to go there. Right? Don't complain because how do I there's a limit on the amount, like paper straws. But that's a resource problem that'll get fixed once the demand is there. So I think the businesses have kind of made the transition in their heads. They know it's the right thing to do. They know their customers want it. Over 70% of the citizens in this town said they want it. So it's almost, I won't say inevitable, but we're on the tail end of this effort that's already happening. All right, so we're kind of catching up. I think what the net I got out of all this is that we're kind of catching up with what everyone else is already doing. So the businesses are in support of it, the people are in support of it. The question I think in mind is, what do we actually then do, right? And it needs to be reasonable and rational. I'd like to say, oh, gee, let's ban all plastic. That's not reasonable or rational or something we can do. Plastics, bags, there is exceptions in almost every one of the ordinances for health reasons. So when you go to the meat counter, that plastic bag is there for a reason, right? It's to protect the chicken and that kind of stuff from contaminating other food products. So in all of the ordinances, there's exceptions. So we're not saying is that we're going to ban everything 100% or recommending that. It says some of the stuff is like useless, right? From a business point of view, paper bags. Paper bags cost 4 cents versus 1 cent, but the cleanup, the recycling is 2 cents versus 17 cents. So cost of ownership from a town point of view is a heck of a lot cheaper to do that. Plus it is renewable. I mean, we probably made a mistake there thinking that trees don't grow again, or you can't recycle paper pulp. But I think from a business point of view, and then from an environmental point of view, I mean, you've all seen the islands of plastic bags out there in the Pacific. We're going to be spending millions and millions of dollars trying to clean this stuff up. Right? The only other thing I want to mention is the thing that scared me the most out of the data we found is that 94% of the U.S. water supply, including us, have microplastics in it. We're drinking this stuff every day. We don't know what the impact is. Kind of don't think it's positive, though. So we'll be seeing more over time about what the result is going to be to us as humans. Anyway, thank you.
I'd just like to footnote also to the comment about different types of plastic. What Stonington is doing, what we're proposing to do, is the single-use bag that you get all your groceries put into, for instance, and take out. We're talking about changing that. But within the store, we're not going after all the other plastic that's being used there. That's a discussion to have much further down the road. Because oftentimes that meat wrapper in plastic, when you're done with it, you put it into the bottom of your trash can, and that's where it stays. The unfortunate thing about single-use plastic bags, they're very light. You put your trash out on the day on trash day to get picked up. The wind, like we had yesterday, comes along and it's gone. It's out there somewhere in the environment. And appropriate disposal of those plastic bags is very difficult.
I mean, just to kind of remind or point out to everyone, there's probably 6 or 7 different chemical compositions of plastics. So the thicker plastic bags can be recycled. The thinner plastic bag, the single-use ones, they cannot. As a matter of fact, I think you've seen, you specifically should not put it in your trash because it gums up the machines, they got to extract it. I mean, that's part of the cost of the plastic bags. It screws up the rest of the cycle, contaminates it, and so that amount of trash cannot then be recycled. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but not all plastic bags are created equal. So, you know, as we work from a business response point of view, you know, some of the thicker bags or the technology of bags is going to bias itself towards plastic which is recyclable and is a little bit better. It's this kind of targeted thin plastic, single use, that's the most harmful, and then we can work to other plastics. I agree with you, we use far too much, you know, throwaway stuff. It's just, you know, not good economics when you get down to the whole life cycle. But that's not where we're starting. We're starting with what I would say is a single use plastic bag restriction.
Thank you. We have Councilor Baumgartner and then Franco.
Thank you. So as a coastal community, we really owe it to the next generation of residents here in town to, you know, who are going to be good stewards of our natural resources to make good to our promise, collective promise here that we're going to make our community more sustainable. And I think your presentation today clearly articulated, I think, a foundation that we can, you know, that we can utilize to move forward on maybe some recommendations we can make to the community about how we can make certainly our community more resilient for the years to come. So thanks again for your work. Just actually wanted to clarify one thing, and this is probably very recent news over the last couple days. Hamden actually banned both single-use plastic straws and bags. And certainly Hamden's a larger community, similar to Groton in many respects. So certainly if Hamden can do it, I think we can too. But at any point did you have conversations with SCARA regarding kind of the amount of plastic bags they get, how it may clog, you know, their, some of the, I know they do recycling as well, so and, a lot of people don't know you can't recycle plastic bags, and that can kind of clog a lot of the machinery that's used to recycle everything else. So were you able to do some fact-finding on that as well?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's actually harmful to the recycling effort. So part of one of the recommendations for education is precisely that. Is, you know, people might feel good, oh, I'm recycling my bags. No, don't do that. You need a separate place to put it. So most grocery stores that around here have a bin for, quote, recycled bags. That goes to a different place, right? We used to ship them to China, but there's no real place to put it. That's another issue. So that's why recycling for this stuff isn't really a good answer. Elimination is a much better approach, and replacement with a different form of receptacle, if you will, seems to be the best way. There's millions, these plants to even recycle that kind of bag, multi-millions of dollars. I think there's one in the world in China, that actually does that work, all right, and they're shut down right now. So we're just, they're piling up.
There's lots of information out there about, in the last 6 months, particularly in the Hartford Current coming out around the Hartford area, of different places where the garbage goes and all the issues they're having with these particular single-use plastic bags. As Larry was saying, gum up the works. We haven't contacted someone like Willimantic Waste and Paper, for instance, and to see what their issues are at this point. We didn't quite go into that detail.
Now, while there wasn't a question that explicitly asked residents, would you support a ban? Did you get any feedback in the other section?
In the comment section, that's on page 10, it was 79% basically supported the restriction of it. Oh, it's up there, it's up there. And out of the comments, that's where he found the negatives. 14% negative. Now, most of the negatives dealt with government overreach and doing something, making me do something I don't want to do. I mean, so it wasn't about the plastics, it was more about, government regulations, you shouldn't have any. So when you take those out, there really was very few that, I think there was 3 or 4 out of the almost 500 responses that we had that actually talked about a negative on the ban for a perceived business or other reason. And they actually wrote them down in pretty good set. Most of those, they didn't have the right facts. They said, oh, do you want to recycle? Things that we can educate folks on and win those over. So I think we could shrink that 14% to probably down to 7. And the 7, they're going to be there. Right? Does that answer the question?
It does, and just one last question. Any recommendations from the commission on banning single-use cups and potentially styrofoam?
Yes, but we were thinking that a place to start would be single-use plastic bags like Hind and plastic straws, and then branch out from there.
All right, thanks again for all your hard work.
Okay, we have Councilor Franco, Atwater, and Heed.
From your investigation, what type of ordinance consequence would happen in the ordinance that you've researched if a business doesn't abide by a ban?
Well, there's several. I mean, it depends on the approach you take. There's communities that go with fines. There's communities that go with, I'm just going to tax you on the bags. And one of the things that we struggled with is enforcement. So what we didn't want to do is how do you create something that now creates a secondary problem, which is how do I enforce this stuff? Mm-hmm. Now the good news is, I mean, through the education and the replacement, and I said the businesses want to support it. I mean, that's what the feedback was. So I think if you take, and most of the ordinances that I've looked at have a 6-month implementation plan. Use up your existing stock, right? Get the ability to order replacement types of products. How do you handle folks that don't spend the 15 or 20 bucks if you get the cloth bags? I mean, there's a lot of techniques that are out there to do it, but I think at the end of the day, it's not going to be an enforcement issue from what we normally say. It's not, fines don't mean a lot, although some of them are there. Most of the time, it's self-enforcing because people want to do it, right? And I think that's how this is going to sort out. That is how it seems to be working out there. You'd be surprised with all the people that are signing up to do it. They will turn in businesses that after the 6-month period aren't doing it. I mean, I think it's going to be self-enforcing, is my opinion. We don't need to go hire an officer or spend towns' money to go around looking to see who did it. I don't think that's the way this is going to sort out at all.
One of the things we found was that if you don't have some sort of teeth in it, some sort of, we're going to charge you more if you continue to use plastic bags, the town's going to put a tax on it, something like that. If we don't put that carrot out there, and it's just a wishful thinking, it's not going to happen. So with all the towns, they had to have an ordinance that had some teeth to it, just so that it catches your attention.
Okay. So I like that you said that we should possibly join with Stonington. I think that would be great for developing a plan, although if they're way far in their process, I don't know if we could jump in at this moment. And I would be in favor of adding the ad hoc committee and further researching this. And I want to thank you for all the research and all the hard work you've put into this. And I do think more with, like, as it was stated in the presentation, having business outreach and education, I think will be the key to making this successful. Thank you.
Councilor Atwater and then Heat.
Following up on Councilor Perry and Franco with the ordinance situation, you talked about the fact that I think in the report it said 23 bills in the state legislature, but it doesn't look like it's going anywhere. And I've noticed that most of the towns like Greenwich and Stamford and so forth are seacoast towns, and certainly the chance of plastic from Groton going in the ocean is probably greater than plastic from Hartford or something. But are there other communities away from the seacoast in Connecticut that are looking into this, in the sense that, do you think there will come a time when the state will have an ordinance that we all can follow rather than individual?
The short answer is yes. He mentioned Hampton. New Britain recently is now at that beginning of the enforcement of their ordinance. They've passed the ordinance and they're now installing it. And so New Britain is certainly an interior town. And I think up in that area, there's a lot of conversations. There's conversations going on over toward Yukon and the northeastern part of the state also. So yes, I think Larry is saying the wave has come. And probably in 2 years, we will not be having this discussion because we've made that change. But we haven't made the change yet, and it's just starting to be instituted, and there's always pushback for change.
I think the benefit of doing something in Groton is to put pressure on the state to do something that's broader and consistent across it. I mean, because that's really where it needs to be done, but you got to encourage the state.
Councilor Atwater,
I will certainly support moving forward with this, and I would say under your leadership and the terrific report you did, that we probably can do this, that I think it's really something that can happen.
I'm going to go to people who haven't spoken yet, so Councilor Schmidt, and then I'm going to take a turn.
I found it very disturbing that when Rhode Island does now ban these bags in most places, but at the grocery stores, they have to supply bins for recycling. They said, but we have no idea what is happening with those recycled bins, that how are they disposing of it? Nobody knows because they don't go into the recycling system.
It winds up in landfills.
Landfills,
Yep.
What if they burn it?
Unfortunately.
Do they burn it?
They can also burn
They
it.
could burn it, which doesn't help.
No.
Because it just breaks it down sooner and goes up into the...
Well, either the only alternatives are either, as we do it at Preston, we burn our garbage, or landfill it.
Right.
That's the only alternative at this point.
And now our newspaper is delivered every day in a nice little plastic bag like that, which
Yes.
is, I always put it with everything and take it either to the Big Y or McQuaid's. And McQuaid's at least offers you a choice between plastic and paper, so that you can take the paper bag and then you don't have to worry about anything. But we still have our newspapers.
BJ's does best. They don't give you any bag.
So,
Or Aldi's.
I think we should take action on this. However, rather than reinventing the wheel, I would like us to wait and see if Stonington does come up with something, and then examine it, and if it's acceptable to us as a council, perhaps we can just enact the same ordinance that they had, and then we'd have some consistency across the two shoreline communities down here. I'll stop there. Mr. Burton, then Councilor Heed.
Just to mention, John Reiner and I had spoken about this, and they'd be happy, the planning staff, to take a look at that, and maybe some others at the same time to, to make a recommendation to the council.
Great, thank you. Councilor Heed?
I think part of what you're talking about when it comes to changing the mindset is kind of creating with businesses is, and the customer experience for that matter, is coming up with another way of looking at things. So my dad, who would also say, get government regulation out of my life and all that, doesn't use plastic bags. He goes to Costco and he gets giddy over choosing boxes, you know, and then he takes them home and he uses them for other things, and then he breaks them down and he recycles everything. So it becomes something that you can internalize. It doesn't have to be government regulation, especially if we take it. I think the approach that you're recommending is the way we want to go. We want to coordinate with businesses, do things that they want to do, reach out, do some education with the public, and examine the different ordinances, not just plastic bags, but like I was in Sarasota and they have paper straws. I heard last week that Suffolk County on Long Island is looking at banning the styrofoam packaging that are fast food containers, I'm guessing from Chinese restaurants. You know, there are all kinds of things that we could do. I imagine plastic bags is the easiest way to create the consistency that could then push it up to the state level, which, like you said, is where it needs to go. So I would be in support of doing a task force, ad hoc or something of that nature.
So later on, the last item on the list is my proposal for the Resilience and Sustainability Task Force. Would you want it to be lumped in with that, or did you want a separate task force?
The
I'm proposing
is more about coastal,
well,
isn't it?
It's about both. Because I'm talking about, I mentioned several things in here, but it could be looped in with that, or we could do a separate one. And the question is, how quickly do you want to do this? Do you want to start right away? Do you want to wait till this is done? What's your pleasure?
I think I'd be willing to go right away.
Right away? Councilor Baumgarten?
Well, I think the commission has brought in enough material that we could probably make a decision. I think it's important we do check in with Stonington. I don't think we should be afraid to be the first in the area. And for that matter, we should probably also check in with some of our other regional neighbors in London and whatnot. Just to kind of sidetrack a little bit, I know the EDC came in as well, and we have a beautiful new logo. Perhaps we can the commission and the EDC can collaborate on branding reusable bags here for residents. So that's just a thought, but I certainly think that's something the task force could be tasked with.
How about if we have Mr. Burt and his staff come back with some suggestions for ordinances and see what the other local communities do, and then at that point we can make a decision what we want to do? Is that acceptable? Do you want to give a time frame? I know we are heading into budget, so it's going to be it's getting a little tight.
I don't think this will take much time.
Okay. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so then we'll do that. So thank you very much. This was great, very informative, and we appreciate all your work on this, and thank you for taking it on at our behest.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, right now we're going to take a 5-minute break because I think we can have them clean up the AV equipment and get ready for the next speaker that's coming in to present to us. Okay, so 5-minute recess, please. Thank you. We are back from recess at 8:38, and Councilor Parker had to leave, so we are down to 8 councilors at this point. We are on to item 5E, 2019-139, cash balance plan presentation, and this is on page 35, and I believe you're on, Councilor Heed.
I'll make a motion the council will receive a presentation on cash balance plans as a retirement option for new non-union employees of the town. I so move.
Second. Not really. It says motion, so that's why we went ahead and moved it. So this is informative. And we have Mr. Cecilia back with us again this evening. And you all should have a packet with you from Mr. Cecilia. All right. Thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Matt Cecilia from TPS Group, an actuary that's been requested to provide information about cash balance plans. A lot of the pension plans out there are primarily grouped into 2 categories: defined benefit and defined contribution. Defined contribution are 401k plans, or 403B or 457 in the governmental, and are primarily employee-based plans, employee-funded plans with some employer-funded plans. But defined benefit plans are what you see much or have seen in the past for the current structure of the defined benefit plans. And essentially, the structure of these are called traditional annuity plans. There's a plan document with a defined benefit formula within it. And someone who works for the town or city for a certain number of years gets a pension based on that formula. Generally, the formula is a certain percentage times average pay times years of service. And that person, upon retirement, would begin to receive a monthly annuity. And what we've seen, though, is that these plans have become very costly, and a lot of the municipals throughout Connecticut and, frankly, throughout the country, a lot of these plans are very underfunded because they're essentially very expensive older plan designs. And we are starting to see a trend of people, at least for new hires, moving towards a more cost-effective solution. And some of the municipals are going to a full switch from a DB plan to a DC plan, which we'll get into, some of those issues in a moment. But there is another plan design out there that is starting to make its way, well, I say starting, over the last few years, starting to make its way through the municipals. And it's called the cash balance plan. And essentially, it's a hybrid formula. And what I mean by that is it has components of a DB plan and a DC plan. We'll get into some of those in a moment. But as mentioned before, the older traditional annuity plans, you essentially would be guaranteeing an annuity in the future at retirement. For these cash balance plans are different. So let me just kind of jump into it. I provided a packet, and try not to skip ahead, if you will. But at the beginning, a brief history of these cash balance plans is they've actually been around for over 30 years. But on the private sector plan, they've been around since that time, but they haven't been as prevalent in the municipals. But that's kind of the trend that we're seeing throughout the municipalities. And the basic structure, here's one of the components of what makes a cash balance plan look like a 401k plan or 457 for a municipal, is that it's account-based. And you can see in my exhibit here under the basic structure, each year you have a beginning balance, you get a pay credit, a certain percent of pay into your hypothetical balance. It gets interest each year, and you have an end-of-year balance. So it's very much similar to the look and feel of a 401k plan, which a lot of employees like because, frankly, they get 401k plans. You have a starting balance, ending balance, and some change that has occurred during the year. Whereas the older defined benefit plans were very difficult for a lot of people to understand. Essentially, they could see, well, if you get a benefit statement saying a future benefit payable down the road is such and such a month, well, how much is that worth today? What's the present value of a projected benefit based on, this discounting and that mortality and this interest rate? And it becomes very convoluted, and it's very, very difficult to answer, the question of what's my plan, what's my benefit worth now? These cash balance plans are much easier. What's my benefit worth now? It's right here on the annual statement. Here's your beginning balance, the amount that you got credited during the year, the applicable interest, and here's your ending balance. So employees a lot of times tend to appreciate how clear these plans are. Some of the basic features, again, back to my exhibit here, is that we're funding towards a lump sum payment at retirement, a one-time plan distribution. But annuities are also available, and so this is one of the defined benefit features. Currently, under the DB plan, someone upon retirement can have the option to elect an annuity over their life or their and their spouse's life. And a lot of times in the 401k world or the defined contribution world, you don't really have those annuity options, but in the cash balance world, you do. So you have the option upon retirement to receive a one-time lump sum distribution or the applicable annuities that are allowed under the plan. And another aspect that it has a DB plan feature is that it's pooled assets. So you currently have a pension plan, a town pension plan. And the assets would just be, this plan is not a spin-off plan or a separate plan. It'd just be for new hires. It's a new formula, a new structure, new benefit structure within the pension plan. And there's also one of the components, again, that makes it a DB plan is there's an interest crediting rate. And so again, you have a beginning balance, a contribution that the town is allocating to you for that year based on a % of pay. And you also have interest. And you can either use a fixed interest rate of a flat 4% or 5% or whatever it may be, or you can use a range based on prior market return. And it can have a ceiling and a cap, whatever those are desired. But that's one of the features of the DB plan, that's a DB plan, is that you have some kind of guaranteed return. A lot of times the floors you'll see is 0%, so essentially it guarantees that you can't lose money for the individual. So that's one of the reasons employees tend to like it is it's transferring the risk off of them, and the town is saying we're going to provide this to you. Some of the advantages of a cash balance plan compared to the older traditional annuity plans, again, it's more cost effective. And essentially what I mean by that is it's cheaper. There's less volatility in the contributions that are required each year. But it's still, we're seeing a lot of municipals push for just to go to a 401k plan. I know it's 457s for governmental. I'm just going to refer to it as 401k so everyone can. So a lot of municipals, even in the public safety fields within the state of Connecticut, are pushing for new hires just to go to a straight 401k plan. So this cash balance plan is a bridge. It's not as advantageous as the older traditional defined benefit plans, but it's more advantageous than a 401k plan. So it meets somewhere in the middle. So there's less volatility in annual contribution, which I will mention in a moment with some of my other exhibits. One of the other things that people really like about cash balance plans is that, again, it's a defined benefit plan. It's a different structure, but it's still a defined benefit plan at heart. So therefore, you can have a disability provision within the plan. Whereas if you went out and had just a 401k plan, 401k plans do not have disability. And therefore, you'd have to go and purchase a separate annuity contract, insurance contract, excuse me, for the divisions where disability is needed or desired. And they tend to have shorter vesting schedules. Vesting, of course, means entitlement to the benefit. And currently for the non-union town employees, it's a 10 years. So essentially you have to work here 10 years or you don't get anything. A lot of times we're seeing that reduced to 5 years. So a lot of people do like this because now they can say, within 5 years, I'm guaranteed something. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Councilor Heath?
This costs about 40% of what it does for a 401k.
I'm sorry?
Am I reading that right? It's about, the DB plan is 40% less expensive to the town than a 401k program.
He read ahead.
Yeah, and I asked not to read it. in one of the future examples, in one of the future exhibits, I present a hypothetical, which I will definitely address.
All right.
But essentially, you're correct, but we're not there yet.
I have a second
right now, we're
question
just kind of
related
talking
to
about
that.
the structure.
Do you have something related to what he's
Yes.
presented? Councilor Atwater.
Something that was just stated. Under the vesting, is it a cliff vesting of 10 years, or is it a percentage after so many years that builds up to the full vesting? I wasn't quite clear on what you were saying.
Sure. Currently, it's a cliff vesting of 10 years.
Okay.
So essentially, you leave 9 years in.
Get nothing.
Nothing. That's correct.
Mr. Burke?
Just to mention that we're looking at a 5-year vesting for it, and that is what we have for DB for the non-union currently is a 5-year. Yeah.
Now, if we could just turn to the next page in the exhibit. I've entitled it Exhibit 1 at the top right-hand corner. And all of these exhibits are going to be straightforward, plain vanilla exhibits. We can make them much more complicated upon the plan design if it's decided to be adopted for new hires prospectively. But in this exhibit, it's just a cash balance illustration representing an individual theoretical new hire with a starting pay of $50,000. And we're assuming annual salary increases of 2.5%. Again, this is just a hypothetical. And we're talking about potentially having a 10% annual pay credit being applied for each individual. So that pay credit, essentially, if someone is, again, earns $50,000, that you are allocating $5,000 that will be payable, that will be going into their hypothetical balance to be paid later. And that balance grows with interest. And in this example, we just use a flat 5% interest. But as I mentioned, it can be different. And in this example, it shows that someone hired and they work here for 25 years, starting pay of $50,000, and all the other assumptions I mentioned before, will get a lump sum, get a lump sum distribution of approximately $306,500 after 25 years of service. And this exhibit also, if you look at the bolded column on the right-hand side, also gives you an individual's cash balance account after each year. So if you have someone going out after 15 years, you can find the number to the right, the $126,000. That's the value there. Someone goes out after 20 years, it's approximately $202,900. So this is just a straightforward example of showing how a cash balance plan works. It's straightforward and easy to understand, but it takes some time to digest. So one of the main questions I get asked is, there's really two main components, is this pay credit and this interest credit. And what happens is when a cash balance plan is first started, things get applied at the end of the year. So the end of year one, the person gets a pay credit. So in this example, they make $50,000, they get a 10% pay credit, therefore they're credited with $5,000 in their account balance. The following year, that prior balance gets increased with interest, and then they get a new pay credit, that 10% of pay for that given year. And all of this adds up into their hypothetical balance, and I mention hypothetical because it's not payable now, it's payable projected later when they actually terminate or retire.
Mr. Bird?
Just to mention, make it clear, the employees, what we're looking at, would pay 5% of that 10%. Employees would pay 5% of their pay towards that 10%.
Would the employee have an opportunity to add to that 5%?
So I can address that.
We wouldn't. Go ahead.
Not within the cash balance plan. If they have accessibility to a 457 plan, they can make the additional contributions into that plan.
And we do have 457 plan.
The 457, again, is like the 401k plan. So the cash balance plan would just be 5% employee, 5% town. Anything the employee desires above that, they would contribute into their 457 plan.
Councilor Baumgartner had a question on this.
So in the handout here, the interest crediting, that rate can change based on the fixed, so the fixed rate. So that would that be the annual return?
Yes, so you can establish it based on the prior year asset return, the prior year return on the fund.
And what about the assumed rate of return? So I know recently the pension board made changes to that number, reduced it so that it would be just more, maybe more honest with ourselves about, what the town will be receiving in terms of our investment returns.
Certainly, the two are independent, but to your exact point is that when I was here last summer, the rate that was used to value the current defined benefit pension plan was 7.5%, and I had presented that. I think that's too high, and presented some options, and it appears that your current actuary has started to implement a stepping process in reducing that interest rate. So currently it's at 7.25%.
So who would make that determination to set the?
We would set the parameters.
Okay, we being the council, or?
And what we're looking at is, we've had Eileen Duggan, our town attorney, involved with this. We're looking at it a 0% minimum, meaning we won't let you go, below for the year. But they're looking at a 5% cap, a ceiling of 5%.
So essentially, this is saying that on your account balance, if there's a market correction, the person can't lose anything, which is great, for the individual. And that's what differentiates it from just putting the money into a 401k plan. Because the town could make a contribution into the 401k plan with the 457 or whatnot. But however, then the employee is responsible for taking that money and investing it. And as I mentioned, if there's a market correction, especially if someone's right before retirement, their account can get severely hit. Here, at least, it's the town that's guaranteeing that it will never decrease.
So what is the key distinction between just the cash balance plan and a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution plan?
So there are different kinds of hybrid plans, but this is the most straightforward and the one that's most widely adopted. There are some other rare ones, but this is the one that you're starting to see find its way through the municipals, again, because it's more cost effective and it's more sustainable, in the future due to that reduced cost. Does that answer your question?
Basically, it's kind of a defined benefit because we're making some guarantees. You're not just left up to the market. And there is an option for, rather than a lump sum, you could take it in annuity, and we'll go into that later, William.
That's correct. And it's also, and remember, as I mentioned before, it's a pooled account. It's pooled assets. So it's the town's responsibility to, invest that money accordingly. Oh, sorry, John.
And to that point, it would go right into the fund that we currently manage through the retirement board. Whereas if you did a defined contribution, you'd have to have you'd have to track that separately from the funds. So this is nice that it fits right in with the rest of our funds.
Do we know of any other?
Not that you wouldn't track it separately, but you can invest it together.
Do we know of any other municipalities who have moved towards?
There's a few in the city of Groton is actually right now negotiating for a couple groups on doing this cash balance.
I have a question. So your illustration lays out 10%, and you were saying you would go 5%, 5% employee in town. For whatever plan we eventually come up with, are you looking at the same thing where it's 50% of whatever percentage from the employee, 50% from the town?
It could be varied, but that's, employees pay 4% right now. We're looking at putting up to 5%. It could be set at whatever, but when we've talked about it, you need to be in that 10 to 12% range for kind of legitimate retirement. Isn't that what we've talked about? You kind of want to be in that 10 to 12%.
I mean, there have been studies that are done, and a lot of time you hear of auto enrollment and how much should you put away into, a 401k plan to really get where you need to be at retirement. And a lot of people have said the minimum is 10%. So this would provide a 10% benefit for the individuals to invest over time, and then anything additional they do on the side in the 457 plan would be just helping them.
That's not what I meant, though. I meant, are you going to split the contribution with half, whatever the percent ends up, is half going to come from the employee and half from the town? Even if it ends up 8, if it ends up 12, will it be half of the 8 and half of the 12?
This is about where we're going to want to be, is the 5 and 5, from looking at what's going on, and we're talking with Eileen. And to make things more complicated, it's not like every year we pay 5%. The interest earned over time counts towards that, so you basically have a calculated payment every year you put in, so it's not just a straight 5% we put in, so it gets a lot more complicated that way. And then there's even smoothing involved, so there's a lot of things like a defined benefit plan that go into this.
There's a lot of things behind the scenes where the actuary kind of does a lot of the grunt work to try to simplify it. And one of the later examples, it kind of goes into detail on that calculation. And this will be something you'll be able to, keep to read it a couple times, frankly, and absorb it.
Thank you.
Moving forward to the next chart. So this is just a straightforward illustration, just to understand. So the next page in my packet is called Chart A. And Chart A and Chart B essentially is measuring the current defined benefit plan versus a cash balance plan for new hires. And the Chart A talks about the accrued benefit, the monthly benefit that's payable at retirement. And currently, under the formula, and again, this is using the same person, the same hypothetical person, $50,000 starting salary, 2.5% salary scale increases and whatnot. You can see how the blue line represents the current defined benefit plan. So after 25 years, this person essentially is getting approximately a $4,000 monthly benefit payable starting at age 65 in this example. Under a cash balance plan, it's lower. It's approximately $2,500. And the main reason for the difference in the reason the current plan is sloping upwards, whereas the cash balance plan is much more linear, is because here's the biggest difference between traditional DB plans and cash balance plans, is that the traditional plan is a certain percent of pay times years of service, but it's based on final few years over all the years of service. And that really drives up those benefits right before retirement. Whereas a cash balance plan, you look at the pay for every single year. So you're dealing with career pay. That's why when we're looking at the Exhibit 1, that $50,000 for that new hire, 10% of that is $5,000. And you're looking at that $50,000, calculating just that piece. Whereas otherwise, you'd be using the final pay over all the years of service. So using the career pay versus the final pay, that's the main difference between these kind of two designs. And just to piggyback off of that, Chart B talks about the value of these benefits. And you're going to see that the current plan, the value at age 65 is approximately $600,000. And as we mentioned a moment ago, the cash balance plan, it's more than half of that. It's in the low 300,000s. But one of the things that you're going to notice here is the blue line is significantly sloping upwards at the end. So what that means is when people are aging and they're getting closer to retirement, their liability is significantly increasing, whereas it's not so much in a cash balance plan. And the reason for that, because I remember Councilor Zappari asked this last time I was here, is the traditional annuity plans, it's just, again, some benefit in the future being discounted back at that 7.25%, that the interest rate that the town's actuary is currently using. So it's being pulled back at 7.5%. And over time, that really adds up, because they always say, what do they say in 401k plans? Start investing when you're young, because the interest is going to compound significantly over time. Well, it works the same way backwards when you're discounting for a defined benefit plan. So the first few years before age 65 in this example, is there just a little bit of discounting. And as you gain steam, then it really slopes downwards. But again, it's interest accumulating, compounding significantly forward, but for defined benefit plans, it's something payable in the future, so you're coming back that same way. So these, for a single plan, even though on Chart A the benefit is only growing a little bit, the liability is significantly sloping upwards because of that interest discounting that's coming into play. Now, Councilor Zappari mentioned this last time, he said, well, how come it's not so much into the, why are you seeing it less in the cash balance plan? And the reason for that is because in the cash balance plan, one of the components is interest projecting forward. So under the older plan, the older traditional annuity plan, it's just 7.25% coming back. But here you're projecting forward at 5% and backwards at 7.25%. So therefore, that's only a net 2.25%. So when we're discounting back at that smaller amount, things are a lot more steady. Whereas when we're discounting back at that 7.25%, that's really bringing those numbers, those liabilities down. That's why you're seeing a much bigger slope on Chart B. And again, I know this is kind of complex, and it's but I have some additional things in here where you can kind of look at I have a few numbers behind here, but one's being discounted back at a significantly higher rate than the other. one has a projected interest built into the formula, whereas another does not. Moving forward, again, I appreciate everyone's time, so I'm just kind of moving forward, but let me know if you have any questions. The next item that I have here is a 2-page letter dated February 15th to Mr. Zagami, the Director of HR and Risk Management, who had asked that I prepare an analysis of the current town non-union employees and essentially what the effect would be on amending the plan for new hires going forward. Now, in this, and this is what Councilor Heed was referring to before, is I presented just a hypothetical of what if the current plan was a cash balance plan for the current individuals. Now, that's not what's, we're looking at. We're looking at new hires only, but what would the effect be? And the biggest thing when you're dealing with the municipals is essentially how much is the annual cost per year as a percent of payroll. And for this particular group, and it's in the third paragraph, it's in the third paragraph on the first page. It's currently, under the current DB plan, 5.4% of pay. So again, the cost of the plan for the current employees of the town non-union is 5.4% of their pay, or approximately $153,000 a year that's contributed on behalf of them. If a cash balance plan replaced, was in effect essentially for these current employees, it would reduce it to, instead of 5.4, in my analysis I have here 3.1 to 3.6%, depending on what, again, I just use flat interest rates. I did a flat 4% and a flat 5% to show some sensitivity, of adopting the different rates. But essentially from 5.4 goes down to 3.1 to 3.6, which maybe doesn't sound like a lot to a lot of people. However, to Councilor Heath's point, is the original number was 153,000, but if the cash balance plan was incorporated, was effective, it would decrease that cost by about 40%, ballpark.
Did you want to ask?
Sure. Related to that, I guess, so it's a lower cost. It's kind of an annuity. I understand that part of it. Are there guarantees that there's a certain return at a certain point, or is this just an estimate?
So it's a great question, and that is something Mr. Byrd had mentioned a moment ago, is that it can be based on prior market return with a range of 0 and 5%. So each year, the prior balance that's accrued to that date of the prior year gets forward with interest in between the 0 and the 5% based on what the prior year's market return was. So each year that changes. So one year it could be 0, the next year it could be 5, and so on. But it's not a double whammy. A lot of questions I get as well, are you also getting that pay credit for that current year? Is that being hit with interest as well? And the answer is no. The interest only applies to the balance as of the prior year. And then the pay credit based on that current year's pay gets added to it. So there's no double whammy effect. So
We have another question.
Oh,
If you're
sorry.
set, are you set? Councilor Atwater?
Following up on Councilor Heath's, so you're talking about a 0 to 5. If the return on your investment is -3 or whatever, the town makes it up. If it's 8, the town profits. If it's 3 or 3.5, that's what's credited that year, is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And a lot of people will say, well, to your point, if it is -3 and you have to make it up, how is that made up? Well, that 3% essentially is not needed to be made up immediately the following year. It is amortized over usually 20 to 30 years. So if,
Well, I was just going to say, that's where the state got in trouble by not funding their pension liabilities in the past. So it might make sense if we were 3% behind to make it up as quickly as possible. But
well, absolutely. And I was also beforehand speaking with Mr. Byrd, and we can provide the minimum that's required to be contributed based on the GASB regulations and the old ARC, or the actuarial determined contribution, now as it's now referred to. And we can, in addition, provide a suggested contribution that, if budget allows for it, to make a little bit of, additional than the bare bones minimum to plan ahead for, for when a situation like that happens. Thank you. And so in conclusion on my February 15th letter, and it's at the bottom of the first page and goes to the second page, is, again, that exercise was just hypothetical for the current people, but going forward for new hires, I'm estimating that it will decrease the contributions from the current 5.4% of pay to around 3.1 to 3.6% of pay. And the one additional piece I would like to add is Mr. Byrd added a one page to the final, to the back of the packet. This is part of a separate letter I didn't originally was not going to present tonight, but I felt that it was important because, and again, I'm not going to sit here and lecture you on it, but it really kind of it defines how this works. So how a cash balance works, and it provides some numbers behind it. So I would suggest, and I will touch upon it momentarily, but I would suggest kind of reading through it a couple times later to explain how this cash balance works. So the main thing is that we're providing a 10% pay credit. Now that 10% pay credit will be brought forward with interest, and then it's going to be discounted back to today, as we briefly mentioned before. Again, you have an actuary working behind the scenes to kind of handle all the numbers. But that 10% pay credit is important because that, again, is not being paid now. It's not like a 401k plan where you're putting in the money 100% now. It's something that's going to grow with interest and over time be payable later. So what that means is it's a 10% allocation into this hypothetical balance, but you only have to fund a portion of it now, because you're guaranteeing an interest rate of, let's just, the 0 to 5%, but the assumed rate of return is 7.25%. And that excess amount, as we talked about a moment ago with the discounting, that excess amount will bridge the gap over time, so that when that person does leave and retire, that they will, each year they will fully have received that 10% with all the attributable interest, but you do not have to fully fund it now. The expected asset return will bridge that gap. But to Councilor Atwater's point, is we could come up with a plan to do a little bit more so that if there is a market correction or something, we're ahead of the game.
Very good. Are there any last, are you finished, sir? I'm sorry.
I am, yes.
Are there any last questions, or did you want to say anything,
Just
Mr.
a
Burton?
note on the process, once we are ready to move forward, it is an ordinance change. We'll have to change the pension ordinance. So we'll have to have a public hearing in that. It will not go to the RTM, though. That's an exemption on ordinances in the RTM, in the charter.
So if there are no further questions, do you need us to give you guidance this evening?
I want you to be I'm comfortable, and I think staff's all comfortable with where we're at. However, I want, it's a complicated process. We've had a lot of time to spend on it. I think you should sit down and forward me, if you could, forward me any questions you have, and I can get them to Matt and then get them back to you. But we've been looking at this for well over a year now, and the first step is to implement with the non-union new employees, and then frankly we'll start looking at the union groups that are up. So we're going to want to move fairly quickly. We don't want it to drag on too much longer if we want to hit these new negotiations.
So over the next week, if we could send questions to you. Councilor Zepari.
Can you tell us what the average annual benefit is to an employee who retires under the present plan as compared with the average annual benefit of the employee who retires under the cash benefit plan?
Yep, I can follow up with that.
I'm sorry?
I can look at that, follow up with Mr. Burt, who can forward it to you.
Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. It's very informative. We
All right, thanks for everyone's time. Have a good night.
Appreciate your assistance. Safe travel. Okay, we are on to 5F 2019-32, TIF Master Plan Downtown Route 1, and this is on page 36. And Councilor Overy, we actually do have a motion on this one.
Let's see. Motion to recommend a resolution to refer the master plan to the Planning Commission and to set a public hearing for the master plan for July 2nd, 2019. I so move.
Second.
Moved by Overy and seconded by Heed. Mr. Reiner is here.
Mayor, excuse me.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Before we hear all of it, can I just ask why it's July and not sooner?
Right, and I asked that question as well, but I'll let you explain it.
Sure, and I will get to that shortly.
Okay, that's fine.
So, John Reiner,
Statutory
Director of
requirement.
Planning and Development, and with me here tonight is Deb Jones, Assistant Director. To quickly answer your question, by state law, we have to wait 90 days from the time this item is referred to the Planning Commission to hold the public hearing.
Thank you.
So by the time tonight, if you say, let's move forward, next week we have a council meeting, the referral goes 90 days from there, we count it out, it's in July. So it takes a little time, unfortunately. So I did prepare a presentation tonight. I know it's getting late, so I'll kind of go through this relatively quick. A lot of these principles I think the council is quite familiar with. I hope that you are after the amount of times we've spoken to about tax increment financing. But for the benefit of the public, as well as this is the point where we're now recommending let's start taking this forward and moving it through the implementation process. So I want to give just a very brief overview of tax increment financing, the policy versus the master plan, our adoption process, and the draft master plan, and kind of how we take that through the adoption process. So not only is tax increment financing itself, understanding the process of how that works is one thing. The entire bureaucratic process of adopting it is almost as difficult as understanding how we actually utilize tax increment financing. So really, in short, what is it? It's a financing method to help us spur and catalyze economic development. That's really what we've been focusing on, to help make up in areas that we target for redevelopment, that funding gap to make the type of development that we're looking for, not just standard development, but that extra sense of place, mixed use type of development that we need. This is the economic development tool that will help drive that. It's in targeted districts that we've identified. The primary district we're talking about tonight is about 145 acres on the Route 1 corridor in downtown Groton. I can't say this enough, it's not a new tax, it's not a special assessment. We utilize the increment and new growth and the taxes that are assessed from new growth. So it won't be taking away from our current taxes, it looks at the new growth of taxes based on current assessments. And it helps us create more economic development. So the steps we go through, we look at the planning of things, the process of putting it together, the approval, and then how we implement these projects. Right now, we're still in the planning stages of tax increment financing. By state law, there are a number of components of a TIF district and of a TIF district plan, specifically, sorry if I hit the screen, the boundaries, the types of improvements and in costs. One of the things, a lot of times when we see TIF moving forward in other municipalities, you will already see a development being proposed. We don't have that master development happening. We're trying to set the table for good economic development here. Things that we're doing, the zoning rewrites, all of our economic development promotions, tax increment financing is a piece of that. The length of the district, as prescribed by state law, can go up to 50 years. The maximum amount of debt that we could undertake if we utilize bonding, which in our policy, in our plan, that's not something that we're proposing to do, but it should be addressed because it's a requirement of state law. The amount of anticipated revenue, we had to make some educated guesses on that, working with our consultant. The estimated increase in assessed value, the same. the amount of value to be captured, what goes into the general fund versus what goes into the TIF dedicated funds, and the use of the revenues for private or public costs. That's all listed in the master plan. So what we can use for public improvements versus what we utilize to help pay back any credit enhancement agreements that we enter into, and as well as the guidelines for the evaluation and approval. Just because someone's in a tax increment financing district does not guarantee that they're going to get a TIF. We set a minimum threshold of $1 million for a project, and there are still other criteria and thresholds of the types of development that have to happen. We're setting a bar to make sure we're not just doing this for something that could be financed without utilizing tax increment financing. So the process and how it works in Connecticut is working with the legislative body, all of you saying that our TIF is going to benefit the municipality. We have that prescribed by state law 90 days prior to the approval of the master plan. Submit the plan to the Planning Commission for their advisory opinion. So that's from tonight. What we're hoping to get is that the council sets the public hearing date and refers this matter to the Planning Commission. We hold the public hearing. If there are any changes that come out of that, we can recommend or modify, and then confirm the eligibility, the assessed value requirements. That's something we've been working with the tax assessor, Mary Gardner, on, and then you would approve that master plan. So again, our policy we adopted back in March 2018. The reason we have a policy, a TIF policy, is because we're looking at doing multiple TIF districts in town. It sets the standards for reviewing, approving, and implementing these districts, and really how we go about doing these master plans in the town or in the city in town. Some of the basics from the policy that are all, again, very specifically put into the master plan, how it's reviewed and adopted by the council, the range of that captured value that we discussed, that the CEAs, credit enhancement agreements, that's our preferred methodology for financing projects when a development happens, and how the expenditures are used, and that the project has to benefit the tax increment financing district. I'll go over this a few times, kind of the adoption process, just because it can be confusing. Initial review, our TIF advisory committee is utilized. They recommend it to the Economic Development Commission. The Economic Development Commission recommends and refers it to the town council. The council then refers it to the Planning Commission to look at consistency with the Plan of Conservation and Development. There's a 90-day holding period there. You set that public hearing, and then after that public hearing, you can adopt the master plan. So right now, the district boundaries of what we're looking at, again, approximately 145 acres right in the downtown area, both north and south of Route 1, in the area around Acrostic Drive, and I think it goes to the Sunnyside Drive in the other direction. We've initially sent mailers out to people within the district, letting them know that this is something we've been working on. It's been published in the newspaper, just articles about tax increment financing. So this is not something new to the community. Goals directly from the master plan of why we're doing this: diversifying the tax base and growing our employment in town. Again, that sense of place, improving our quality of life within Groton, focusing on infrastructure, housing type and quality, as well as helping our businesses stay here and grow. And you know, we have EB, we have Pfizer, we have the Navy base. We really need to capitalize on that. One of those, the biggest statistic that really jumps out in my mind from the market analysis is that 80% of the people that work here don't live here. How can we get some of them to live here and really be a part of Groton? So some of the details within that district master plan: the term of our tax increment financing district is 30 years. The value capture is 50% of the incremental value. So 50% will be set aside for tax increment financing, 50% will go to the general fund. Again, that's not of current today taxes, that's of the growth in taxes for that district. And then the credit enhancement agreements are the preferred methodology, allowing up to 100% of the captured value to be used in credit enhancement agreements for a particular project, not for the whole district. Some of the types of projects we've been talking about, that would be the publicly funded projects, or that we could work with the developer as part of their credit enhancement agreement. Streetscapes, facade improvements, roadways, pedestrians, walkability, bikeability. Some of the things that we see as constraints with development. Stormwater, brownfields cleanup, those are things that certainly slow down development today in Groton. And it's not that we're overly regulatory, it's just that's the way it is. We have to build quality stormwater. We have to remediate brownfield sites or even older sites that weren't developed to, or designed to current environmental standards. Looking at public transit and getting people around, waterfront access. You know, I think people often forget how much coastline we have and how close that is to the Route 1 corridor, as well as economic development and helping to push some of those initiatives forward. So again, the adoption process, initial review by the TIF Advisory Committee, they voted in favor of moving this master plan to the Economic Development Commission. The Economic Development Commission voted in favor of sending it to the Town Council. So, you know, we're looking tonight, again, to have you move it to that next step. This kind of goes over a little bit of what I've already spoken about, of where we are, how we've been working on this, and what our next steps are. So that was the abbreviated tax increment financing version 101 in about 10 minutes or so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there questions for Mr. Reiner? Councilor Aubrey.
Could you go back to the map for a second?
Yes.
I have no idea where anything is right at this point, but does that go up Paquonic Road at all?
If you're going over, can you take the mic with you, Mr. Reiner, please? Thank you.
So to give you a little bit of perspective, Big Y Plaza, and I just want to make sure I'm getting them all right. Chris Regan's Plaza here. There's a, this is the new Aldi's Plaza, or not new, but recently renovated. Yeah, Acrostic Drive here.
So to answer your question, yes. Yeah, Paquonic Road is Route 1 in front of the Big Y Plaza, and then it does cut to the south, just to the railroad tracks. So that's the only portion of Paquonic Road that's...
Yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't go far enough in to affect...
Doncasters?
Yeah, Doncasters.
Correct.
If they decided to do something in the future, would you be able to modify that at all, or do we have to stay with that?
So like many of our planning and economic development documents, they are living and breathing documents. They can be amended as time goes on.
Okay. Not that I know that they want to do anything, but it's a pretty large business.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Reiner or Ms. Jones?
No, thank you for all the work you've done on it. I know it's been a long time coming.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, we do need to vote on this. Oh, yep, Councilor Schmidt, I'm sorry.
I just wondered if inflation is factored into the original assessment value for the intervening years. I mean, I bought a house 50 years ago for, it was $11,000. I wish I could have it on the rolls as that, but does that increase start only with what the assessed value, original assessed value was, and then everything else is just 50% goes into the general fund of the increased value, and 50% goes into the TIF fund?
So some of that inflation will reflect within that.
Right.
But it's going to take a long time for that to start accumulating to a real substantial sum. And that only happens when we start looking at property sales, as well as the revaluations that we do through the assessment office. So it's not that every year you're going to see a 2% inflation happen.
Councilor Heath?
Do you want to talk about, we've talked about it before, but like the TIF, you can use it for like drainage and improve that. Is that something that's a serious concern in that area? Is that, a benefit?
Yeah, so, and Deb can probably speak more fluently on this if we wanted to get into the details, but this area does historically have drainage problems. There was a big drainage project that was completed a number of years ago. Money was set aside for that, but this is a lower lying area, as well as just the way the stormwater from the region funnels here.
Yeah, in addition to that, this is the headwaters to Birch Plain Creek, so there are water quality issues as well. The flooding problems have mostly been corrected through that project that John talked about, but definitely water quality issues.
And that's something, as development happens, it can be handled privately, and that's something we can work with future developers to build better stormwater systems, and working that into the credit enhancement agreement, or over a period of time, there are some public improvements that we could always do as part of that, also paid for through the TIF.
Councilor Franco?
So, thanks for all the work you've done. There's so many, when it comes to the TIF, I mean, on the advisory board, and there's so many things going on with this and so many different aspects. So this is going to come to a public hearing in 90 days, and are you going to do any informational sessions for the public prior to that, so they're informed, and when they come to that meeting, they may want to ask questions?
Yeah, we certainly can. We've been working with the Economic Development Commission and others. We're more than happy to hold some type of a forum, or try to work with the Groton Business Association or some others to do a little bit of outreach specifically for the property owners within this district.
Okay. And this will also pertain to any new business that wants to come in, developers that may want to buy up areas, if that's...
Within this district,
within
yes.
this district. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Baumgartner?
Real quick, I know there wasn't a recommendation for the town to issue debt to initially pay for the TIF improvements. Because of that, if we were to go down that route, how would we pay for those initial improvements? Would it be sort of happen kind of after that fund is, receives funding through tax, the increment in value?
Exactly that. So over time, as money builds up, then we could look at, all right, what type of project could we do? And I think once the new zoning's adopted in just a few months from now, as well as once this is adopted and it's out on the street, and so actually both of them will end up happening right around the same time in July, the zoning as well as this, if we move forward to adopt it. I think we'll see some of that private development move forward and start developing in this district. So that could start adding some funding to it. But if not, it will take a number of years for funding to start really building up within this account.
And in your eye, is there kind of a hunger right now within the business community to leverage this, really the TIF district to get, say, mixed use off the ground in that area?
I think so. People are looking at it. One of the difficulties we have is just trying to get all the partners at the table. So we have developers that are very hungry for doing that type of development. We also need property owners willing to sell or partner with those developers.
And so, in my eye, the best use of those funds would be to pay for infrastructure that would support that development, as opposed to kind of handing that money to a developer and saying, "Hey, we're rewarding you for investing, here," and that will kind of reduce your the amount you would have to put in to invest in that property. So whereas the infrastructure would really benefit everyone that utilizes that property just by virtue of going to the shops and living there and what have you. So is that kind of a shared? Does the department kind of share that mindset that would be the best use of funds?
So it actually works both ways, in the sense that One of the main reasons that we don't get the type of mixed-use development that we're looking for is because there's a funding shortfall often to finance that, to build it. It's expensive to build that type of development, as well as the public improvements that need to happen. So the stormwater improvements, the other things that need to, roadway improvements, sidewalks, bike lanes. And when we work with the developer, it's not just, increasing their profit margin. It's, all right, let's make, in order to utilize tax increment financing, they have to show us their books. They have to show us what their expenses are, and it has to be very defensible. It's something we would be working on with our finance department, our assessment department, as well as bringing in an outside expert in, business and development to make sure, everything is copacetic. As part of that, certain public infrastructure improvements can happen, and we would be encouraging the developers to build that and wrapping that into the credit enhancement agreement. So we would see the larger public benefit of infrastructure improved within the district that would benefit not only that one developer, but the public at large and possibly other potential developments, as well as getting that development off the ground and making it happen. So, for example, not this TIF district, but one of the other ones that we've been working with the developer on, it's going a little slower than we had originally hoped. They were talking about doing a sewer line extension that would benefit not just that developer, but many property owners.
And last question. With the TIF district, would you be capturing the value increment of the land or assessed value with or the improvement value? With the improvement value, over time that depreciates, whereas the land value would really be fixed, more or less. Or in the case with the improvements, improvements to infrastructure, it would go up. So, what would you be capturing?
So when we assess, we're looking at both the assessment of the land and the improvements, of buildings type of improvements.
Great.
So as land values go up, if people are investing in this area, it's not only the building value that's there, but land values will increase.
Councilor Heath.
So 2 questions. When you have the public hearing, will we have the zoning committee, for example, be available to do presentations on the different kinds of things that they're trying to achieve in that particular area? Is that something that would be a part of that?
Not necessarily. I mean, that's something, honestly, Deb and I can speak to the zoning and where that's going within the district at the public hearing.
But as part of the master plan, you will see a schematic of what we envision down there. I mean, a schematic master plan. You'll also have the input from the Planning and Zoning Commission probably at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'll help the sales effort. And the other question is on page 99, section 7-339KK. It says that, as I understand it, the legislative bodies, that would be the council, will need to set up an advisory board. Can you tell us what the advisory board is all about?
Sure. So right now we have, it's funny, it came up at today. So we have a TIF advisory committee in place now that was set up by the last town council. And it's something that was originally set up as a ad hoc committee that we thought would help just get us through these first initial tax increment financing policies and plans. And we really hadn't envisioned a sunset date on that, but I imagine sometime in the next month to 6 weeks, we'll be working with the manager, but talking about how do we either codify the existing tax increment financing advisory committee, or taking those duties and incorporating them into another existing commission. So today we have a commission that's in place that was adopted by a previous council. Within the master plan, it actually states the makeup of that. I believe it's 1 town council member, 2 RTM members, 2 members from the Economic Development Commission, 1 or 2 members from the RTM, and 2 members of the public that show up and participate and help guide us through this process.
Okay, so this isn't like it isn't a legislative thing like community development, this is more of an ad hoc kind of creation.
Correct.
Okay.
And so that's something that exists today. It's never been codified in ordinance. And sometime in the next month to month and a half, we'll be having a little bit more of a recommendation to the council of what we do with the existing TIF advisory committee and their role moving forward.
Got it.
But
Thank
it
you.
is established by the general statute, so there are going to be specific requirements that we're going to have to follow when we're filling the board. Councilor Zafari, please.
On page 47, page 8 of your report, there's a comment in the middle paragraph that says 100% of the real property tax revenues from the captured asset value of the TIF district will be deposited in the district master plan fund and will be allocated as shown in the graphic described below. The thing I'm concerned about is that when we started out on the TIF program, we were under the impression that the taxes that the business paid would not be less than they're paying currently. And I want to be sure that that amount of money will continue to go to the general fund to help us to support our schools and our highway reconstructions and all the other things we have to pay for, and not be lost in the funding of the other activities in this plan.
Correct. So two things. One, bigger picture. I can't guarantee that the taxes they pay today are going to be the same as what they pay 5 years from now if there's depreciation or other things. So,
right.
But when we're looking at that original assessed value, and here you'll see the acronym, the OAV. If someone is paying $1,000 in taxes today, that's what is going to continue as long as values stay the same and our tax rate stays the same. That's what they'll continue to pay.
Well, anyone that's in the TIF program is going to have an appreciation of the value of their property by being in the TIF program. They're going to be building something new.
Theoretically.
So they should at least maintain the value that they had when they went into the program.
Correct. They should. And adopting a TIF district should not, that in and of itself, I don't see increasing people's property values. We hope that people are going to come forward and do major renovation or major redevelopment projects. And then it's the increment, so the increase of that assessed value of that improvement that will see 50% of the increment of the increase go into the general fund, and then the other 50% of the captured value, what that line there is saying is 100% of the 50% of the captured value will go into the dedicated TIF account, and then that will be utilized either for credit enhancement agreements or those public improvements. It gets a little confusing in there.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Schmidt.
I just think it's important for the public to realize that this is not a plan that would be primarily for maintenance of buildings or of parking lots, that this is something that will somehow enhance that property in a new way and be part of a development plan that we have, that you have all worked on very diligently. It's something that would create a completely different showcase of Groton, and it would be something to be very proud of. But it's not for just maintaining a building, to put on a new roof or patch up that parking lot. It's for the development.
Perfect.
All right, I think everyone has had a chance to speak. So does anyone have any final thoughts on this? If not, we'll call for a vote. Okay, so we are on 2019-32 TIF Master Plan Downtown, Route 1. We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? So moved unanimously. We are at 8, as Councilor Parker is not with us right now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are on to item 5G, 2019-141, rescission of the Noent Gardens Task Force guiding document. And this is on page 101. And we are at Councilor Atwater, I believe, correct?
I'd like to move to recommend to the full council to terminate the Noang School Public Gardens Task Force guiding document and to direct the town manager to consult with staff and offer a recommendation on potential uses of the property, and also recommend an area reserved for public garden / natural playground area.
Okay, hold on one second, because there's a change, so. All right, so that was moved by Atwater and seconded by Heed. And can you just, the section that was changed, can you just restate that again from the motion that was originally passed out? And also,
Just potential uses of the property, and also recommend an area reserved for a public garden / natural playground area.
thank you for repeating that. All right, so we have a motion on the floor. And the action, the council has to decide how they'd like to proceed on this. Is there any discussion? Councilor Perry.
Earlier tonight, we heard Leanne speak about how the EDC had a very slow start for a number of years. And she was very pleased with the development that they've come to this year and the progress that they've made. I think that the Noack Gardens has had a slow start, but they came to talk with us last meeting, and they proposed that they were raising money to make a pavilion on the property as a first part of their plan to develop this into a park for the town that could be used by everyone. And it would, from the sound of it, their plans would make us proud. Now, they've had some of those plans for a long time and haven't executed. But the team that came to speak last week, I thought, showed that they had some energy and were working hard to move forward. They proposed that they should have enough money to build the pavilion by April. And I would move at this point that we postpone this vote until the second meeting of the Committee of the Whole in April.
Can you give me a date, please? April.
I knew the date a little while ago.
Okay, hold on, I'll see if I can help.
Let me get
Can you repeat again what you're looking at?
April 23rd.
Which would be the second count, April. So your motion, repeat your motion, please.
I move that we postpone the vote on this issue until April 23rd, 2019, by which time the Noack Gardens Committee or Commission can report to us on the success of their fundraising to build the pavilion and move forward with the rest of it.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Schmidt. Okay, so there's discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion to postpone, correct? It is up for discussion, correct? Councilor Heed.
I've lived in a number of places that have really beautiful parks, common gardens, all that kind of stuff. And it's really important to the community, I think. My problem with the current situation is that I don't have confidence that it can be executed and carried out. I have serious concerns about the financial wherewithal, and I feel like the town, by giving this large of a piece of property, quite possibly put you in over your heads at no fault of your own. You've made a great effort. But you've gone through the process of, you have volunteers who you rely on for work, but they all have lives, and you don't always make what's it called, a quorum for the meetings, and work doesn't get done. And I feel like we would do you a favor to make it a smaller section, smaller area to manage. That's just my personal opinion.
We have Councilor Franco and then Baumgartner.
I sent Mr. Wright an email, and I apologize to him if I came across as gruff or cross, and that was not my intention. I did not mean to embarrass anybody or humiliate anybody. I think people that know me, I'm pretty direct, and maybe that comes across in a different way. And I apologize for that. But going forward on what we're going to do with this, I had contacted Betsy McCousher just simply because there's been much information out there that's people don't know what's true and what's correct. So I contacted Betsy McCousher to quantify everything I have to say. Ms. Thomas had forwarded me minutes from the Groton, from the Noink Garden Task Force last Wednesday after our town council meeting to show me all of the minutes that they had. And Ms. McCousher, who's the town clerk, had also forwarded me all the information she had, and I created a spreadsheet and I compared. So I would like to confirm with Betsy, how many meetings did they have in 2018?
Do you have a microphone, Madam Clerk?
Oh,
You do?
My God, I do.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Let's see. 2018. There was a regular meeting on February 20th. There was a regular meeting, a special meeting on, well, I'll just give you the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings that I have information on as agendas, but only minutes for one meeting.
Minutes for one meeting?
Yeah.
So Ms. Thomas, I had questioned her on this, and she had replied to me and said she didn't have quorums for the other meetings, so they didn't have them. So in all reality, the Knowing Gardens had one meeting in 2018. So I mean, people are calling me and asking me what the truth is, and I'm trying to explain to them because there's other information out there trying to say that I'm exaggerating or I'm putting out wrong information or I'm trying to sway somebody. And the facts are, they had one meeting. And would you tell them, when did you receive the minutes for that one meeting?
The 20th of February 2019.
It's just last week. And
yeah.
Who did you receive them from?
You.
Because I forwarded them from the garden, who forwarded them to me, and then I forwarded them off to her. And this doesn't, we're not even taking into account what happened in 2017, and I'm not going to bother because I wasn't on the council at that point. And just one more quick question. If the garden had the minutes, would you consider this accessible by everybody? If they had them in their computer at home?
That's not what the Freedom of Information guideline is. Any board or commission that the town council creates, the town clerk's office is considered the depository for minutes. So, no, I would not consider that accessible if it was someone's home.
Thank you. And just to clarify, because this has been put out there on the Gardens website, I'm not the website, their Facebook page, so it's out on social media. People are insinuating that I would like to take the garden away so I could put it in the beautification committee, and that is farthest from the truth, and I've never said anything of the sort. I don't even know where this came from or how it was even fabricated. I just want to clarify that. But going forward, I also think from just the communications that we've heard, I think the Garden Task Force, they're gardeners, and this is what their passion is, and that's what they want to do. And maybe they don't want to come to all these the meetings that are all the administration part of it. And I would agree that I think we should figure out what to do with the land and maybe send it to the property commission to see what to do with it. But I want to make sure that they do have a garden because this is their passion, this is what they want to do. And I have received outcry from many people that want to have the communal gardens in Noank. I mean, that's very important to them. And I also think that when normally there's a neighborhood developed and there's a new neighborhood development, they usually put aside a little piece of land so that children have a place to play and they have a park. And I want to make sure that this neighborhood would have the same thing because they did lose the school, but I still want them to have somewhere to go. So I feel comfortable that if we go forward to see what we want to do with the land and send it to the commission or the committee, but I want to make sure that they do have a garden area and a park area for the neighborhood to enjoy. And if they did want to come up with another task force, by all means, they can. But I just don't think what's working, it's not working right now. And I also think that their goals, although they sound and looked very wonderful in the presentation, and maybe I didn't say that the other day, and I'm sorry, but they were very nice, but they're like $1 million presentation. I mean, these are very lofty goals, and they're having a hard time having meetings. And if you're having an event in 2018 and you're not having a meeting, I mean, there's something wrong. I mean, because you can't have events without planning, so which means you have to have a meeting, and then there's no notes on it. And this is just, it's not open and transparent to everybody. And this is what I was trying to get across the other day, and maybe I came across the wrong way, and I'm very sorry for that. But I would like to say, I'm sorry for that, but I just think this is, the goals that they have are too lofty for the size of their group. I think it's too much for the task force at hand right now. Thank you.
Councilor Baumgartner?
Motion on the floor.
Excuse me?
I'm just reminding you of the motion on the floor to postpone. So.
Correct, but we can discuss this. So, Councilor Baumgartner?
Well, it goes without saying that I think talking about this very issue has generated both an interest in the gardens, exactly what they're doing, and also showed that there are folks who certainly do care about the gardens, who may not have openly shared that with our group initially. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank the folks who came out tonight, and I know it's already, it's nearly 10 o'clock, so you don't have to be here, and so thank you for coming out and voicing your concern about what's happening. We've received dozens upon dozens of emails from folks about this issue. You know, I'm not sure the task force is the only group that has maybe been negligent with their day-to-day dealings with, in terms of submitting information on time, and I totally understand that, and I think many of those task force members addressed that in my sufficiently last meeting, but I think they're moving forward. There is an understanding on the part of the task force and certainly folks who are involved that things do need to change, and that submitting meeting minutes are required. They're not a choice. I was very impressed by the answers provided specifically by Brian Kent, who is responsible for doing the design work for the project. It goes without saying that his work, that he's done everything ranging from designing the Mansfield Town Square to being involved in the planning of trails and parks throughout our region and the state is really amazing work. And I think having that expertise there will certainly go a long way in actually maybe getting that fundraising off the ground, because it's a real tangible proposal now, not just kind of a pie-in-the-sky idea. So in that respect, I think knowing that there is clearly an interest in seeing a park built there, I think that's in line with our council goals in creating more vibrant, livable communities where there are parks within individual neighborhoods, irrespective of whether or not it's in in an urban neighborhood or suburban neighborhood. I think every neighborhood is worthy of having those kinds of spaces, and the task force members made it abundantly clear that that park will be available to all the residents. So if you are a kid who wants to sled, it's okay to sled there, even if you live there in the city of Groton. And if you want to garden there and you live in Mystic, you can do that. And I think finding ways the task force can work with, say, the folks you talked about who produced a tremendous amount of produce this year would be great. So I think it behooves us to maybe start the dialogue, maybe focus on the proposals at hand and of the proposals they made last week on the project, as opposed to kind of taking the rug from under their feet. So I'm not supportive of
making any recommendation that the town should dispose of the property. I think it's a huge mistake. It's essentially, a short-term municipal revenue gain for long-term economic and environmental losses. And I know that's not what we're discussing, but we're rescinding the 4-year agreement that would allow for this park to be developed and a garden to grow. And so if we make any changes to that, I wouldn't support that.
So what we need to, this is what the clerk was getting to earlier, what we need to do, what we're discussing now, is the motion to postpone this. So it's good that you're giving backstory and your opinion as to what you would like, but you need to keep it attached to this particular motion. So are you supportive of the postponement or not? That's where we want to go with the discussion right now. So I'm not sure if...
Can you read the second motion again?
Did you write it, Councilor Zepari?
No, I didn't, but I'll be happy to.
What I wrote down was Councilor Zepari moves to postpone to the April 23rd, 2019 CAL, by which time the Noank School Public Garden Task Force can report on, what was the last part?
The progress in raising funds to build the pavilion. They had told us that the last meeting.
Okay, I know. It's Councilor Opry now. Go ahead.
My only concern with this is I share many of Rachel's concerns about it, but more than that, I'm concerned with the fact that maybe we have, but I don't think so. I don't think we've had a meeting where people can talk with us. Yes, we all got a lot of emails, but those emails are not being shared with the public at this point. And I feel strongly that we should even maybe have a special meeting where people can come in and voice what their plans are, or maybe some modifications to it, or whatever needs to be said. But I think we need to have that opportunity. And perhaps before the April 23rd date, we could make that happen.
Well, we will have a council meeting next week with citizens petitions, so people certainly would be welcome to come in at that point and speak to whatever issue that's pertinent to Groton at that meeting.
Gets a little confusing sometimes, at least to me. But I think it would be good that people come and talk with us. And then it helps us to make our decision. That's a very valuable piece of property, and it could be adding to our tax base. And that's a balance we have to make. And in order to make that balance, we need input. And I will say that, I think if nothing else, it needs to be that the entire town knows about this park. And I feel that never happened. So maybe by this conversation, we can at least let more people know.
So process-wise, we will need to be voting on Councilor Zepari's motion to postpone first. But you also need to be aware that if that motion fails, we go back to the original motion, at which point it would go, if we voted in favor, it would go forward to the council meeting where everyone could come out to the council meeting and speak at that point and share their concerns with the whole public instead of just individual councilors through email. So I just wanted to state that first. So we have Councilor Zepari, or did you have something else? I'm sorry.
I didn't quite understand that. Say that again?
So what's on the floor right now is the motion to postpone. Okay, if we postpone, regardless if we postpone or not, at the council meeting next week, the public will have the opportunity to come out and speak. So tonight's our working meeting, our committee of the whole, so we don't have public input at this meeting. At our regular council meetings every month is where we have citizens petitions. At that point, the public can come forward and speak. So if that's your goal, regardless of whether this motion, Councilor Zepari's motion passes or not, we will have citizen input at our next Tuesday meeting. Does that make sense?
Right.
Okay.
But if we don't go with that one and we go with this one,
right,
then we're basically done.
Well, then we have to discuss the motion that Councilor Atwater made at that council meeting. where you will not be called to a vote until after you've had the chance to listen to the citizens' petitions. So that's the process that we're in right now. And we have Councilor Heed and Zeperi again. Is anybody? I'm sorry? Zeperi first. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, we've all been under the impression that the Knowing Public Gardens property has not been well managed over the last few years. We've all seen some dilapidated condition of the gardens, the fences, if we vote at this time to send to the town council a resolution to terminate the agreement, we're moving to eliminate the chance of their getting their feet under them and moving forward. If we vote to say, oh no, we're not going to terminate them, then it doesn't matter what they do in the next 2 months to raise funds and get ready to build the pavilion. They've been, this is an issue that's dead for the present time. By postponing, I think we are asking them, okay, you said you're going to do this, do it, and if you do it, we'll back off. But if we, and so it would be better to postpone it than to have any vote on the original motion at this time. Everybody's looking at me kind of like they don't know what I'm talking about, and I probably don't either, but.
I don't think I think we're thinking, because this is a serious matter, and we're charged with making a serious decision, and we're all contemplating.
One of the things I think about when I think about a park is I think about Central Park in New York City. And that's an extremely valuable piece of property that's been set aside for people to enjoy the green area in the middle of a municipality. And we are developing a municipality here, and we hope to increase our population. I think we have to preserve some of those areas, and these people are working on developing something for that area. I think that if they can do it, it's a win-win situation for us. If they can't do it, then we've got to do something else. So they've asked for a chance to do it. They said they could have the funds raised by April 4th, I think was what they said at the last meeting. I'm saying let's have them come back and talk to us in the middle of April, and on April 23rd we can reconsider this motion.
Councilor Heed.
Comfortable with Councilor Zeperi's motion. It's actually the way that I would like to go is to wait a little bit, because they did say this is, you do it or you don't do it. But I would also like to reiterate that I think you need to come back to us and tell us, can you manage this property as it is, or do you need a smaller piece? Just give us your thoughts on that when you come back. Thank you.
I'm torn because we as a council have not had any say in what is happening with this piece of property. And Councilor Atwater's motion gives us a chance to have a say in this and to possibly redirect what's happening at the property. I understand Councilor Zeperi's motion, and I think it is fair to give a little bit of time for you to work on your deadline. However, having said that, know that when we took office, we have many excess properties in town. And there are people that are saying to us, well, what about the school in my neighborhood? Can't we have a garden too? What about this school? Can't we have a garden? And so you need to understand that you're not alone, that there are schools all over town, properties all over town that people would love to see just left as they are. And you saw tonight we're faced with economic development, trying to grow the grand list, trying to do smart growth. I would rather leave pristine land untouched and take a piece of property that's already has the infrastructure there and build there, rather than cutting down trees and cutting down a wooded area and running new lines, okay? So that's where I'm coming from. back to the motion on the floor, I could agree with Councilor Zepari to hold off, but I am interested in this council being able to have a say in where we're going with these excess school properties. Councilor Franco.
I wanted to make a note that I don't think we've approved the pavilion.
We have not.
So can they raise money for a pavilion if we haven't approved a pavilion? Or can they do that and then come to us for approval? I'm just curious, just out of protocol.
Mr. Byrd, I understand that they can do fundraising, but any building on that property needs to be approved by the council, correct?
That is correct, but I also do understand they have a concern over will people commit money without a commitment from the council.
Councilor Atwater.
I just have a question. If we pass Councilor Zepari's motion and they raise the money, does that automatically stop us from doing anything? I mean, is that...
I don't believe it's binding.
And as far as the raising of the money, is it cash in hand? Is it charitable pledges? I mean, is it, you know what? Because
cash in hands.
Because I know from my previous experience that there are many colleges in this world that have names on them where the donors backed out of making the donation. So again, I don't know.
Right.
How do we do the judgment? How do we make the final call?
Councilor Zepari, do you have thoughts on that?
I think we're going to hear from them in early April, and we can find out whether they have cash in hand or what they have, and how likely it is they're going to be able to go forward. We can make a determination at that time how likely it is they're going to be able to go forward with their plan, and how energized they are. If they are as energized as they appeared to be last week, I think we can make our decision at that time. I don't think we have to make a decision at this time. What we want to decide this time is to give them a chance to move forward as they said they would, and if they accomplish that, we can, and they come to us and say they have accomplished that, then we can make a judgment at that time.
Okay, everyone has spoken. Councilor Schmidt, did you want to say anything before we call for a vote?
Well, I think that we owe it to the Knowing group to give them the opportunity to follow through on this plan that has obviously taken a great deal of effort and work and concentration by a lot of people. And if they're able to come to some kind of fruition with that plan, then I think then we can make a decision. But right now, we don't know what we're doing, and I would rather wait until April and find out what has happened. And if this is something that has enough community support to go forward, then I would certainly be more than in favor, as I was in the past. Thank you.
Councilor Baumgartner.
And I fundamentally believe if we go that route, the conversation should be...
Which route is that?
The route of postponing this vote or decision to a later period in April, that it should be centered around modifying the document as opposed to rescinding the guiding document. You know, if there are suggestions that come from the public that we could consider that could be helpful to the project or may impact kind of how we view the long-term plan, I think that would be very beneficial to the process and to the whole town. So just wanted to put that out there.
And I agree. As I said, I think we need to have an opportunity to shape what we want to have happen at these properties. All right, everyone's had a chance to speak. Is there anyone else who wanted to add anything at this point? So right now we are voting on Councilor Zepari's motion to postpone, okay? And I'm going to read it one more time, Joe, or Councilor Zepari, and you tell me if I got it right or not. So the motion on the floor is to postpone to April 23rd, 2019 COW, by which time the Knowing School Public Garden Task Force can report on the progress in fundraising, correct?
Right.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstentions? Okay, so we are 8. So we have 7 in favor, 1 opposed, 0 abstentions. The opposed is Atwater. Okay, so that has been postponed until the April 23rd COW. Councilor Zepari, if you could please commit that to writing for the assistant to the manager.
Sure. Would you give me what you just wrote there?
No. All right, it is now 10:15, and we have 3 items left to take up. But I have to check and get consensus that if we could just kind of plow ahead, that's kind of my idea, if we could just move ahead with this and take these 3. Is there any objection to moving ahead?
I want to call it a night.
I object
Can we at least
to
do
moving
the
ahead.
next one, because they've been waiting patiently all night?
Yes.
They're in the crowd.
We have, so 2018-526-3,
Because we already postponed it once before.
we postponed it once, are we willing to, can we do that one more?
John asks, we do it.
John, Mr. Burt asked, so, all right, so we are on to Counselor Schmidt, if you could read 5H. We
All
need
right.
quiet, go ahead, please.
I'm making a motion to recommend a resolution to approve the sale of a .168 acre portion of parcel 260-819-714-055 to Christopher Drake for $2,500 with funds to be deposited in a new fund to be used for cleanup of nuisance properties. I so move.
Second.
Moved by Schmidt and seconded by Heed. Is there any discussion on the approval of .168 acre sale? Counselor Aubrey.
We're too tired to oppose it.
See the look on the constituent's face. Anyone else? Okay, I will call for a vote on item 2018-5263. Town property sale. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I'm asking for a ruling from Counselor Heed on something here. Do we need, as the chair of the Rules Committee, do we need unanimity to continue past 10, or do we need a majority?
I don't believe so. I think it's just a majority.
I believe it's just a
Majority?
majority. Yeah.
Okay, so how many are willing to take up the last 2 items? If you could just do a show of hands. Quick? Okay, all right, so let's go on to the Town Council Appointments Policy. Thank you. This is 2018-2611. Counselor Zepari, page 108, please.
What do we do? What number is that?
Here.
I move that we recommend a resolution to adopt the town council appointments policy as amended.
Second.
Moved by Zepari and seconded by Schmidt. Counselor Heed, since this is your item, is there anything you wanted to say about it?
The main thing that's happening is when it comes to reappointments for the Personnel Committee, it'll be up to the chairs, like basically once a year or once every 2 years, whatever. The sitting members are up for renomination, and the current process is relies on the parties to go through, contact them, contact the chair, find out who wants to serve again, does the chair recommend them, all that kind of thing. So we're just shifting this to the chair, and it takes the parties out as sort of a middleman. Doesn't affect the new appointments, either from RTC, DTC, or the unaffiliated. We'll still go through the normal process for that. And make our recommendations, and then, if we have 2 people for 1 spot, then the Personnel Committee has to choose. But that being said, that's, in a nutshell, that's what it is, and I had asked for a postponement to make sure that the majority of the chairs were favorable, and they are. I haven't reached all of them, but it's a pretty simple procedure, and everybody seems comfortable so far.
Great. Madam Clerk?
I had a hard time hearing, just because it differed from what I read from the changes. Are you saying that all reappointments for boards and commissions, party affiliations or not, will go through the chairs of the,
Right,
of the
so-
Board of Commissions, not not through the political parties?
Correct.
Okay.
Any questions or discussion on 2018-261? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of 2018-261 Town Council Appointment Policy, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So moved unanimously with 8. And I will move the last one since it's my gig. 2019-140 on page 122. I make a motion to recommend a resolution establishing a Groton Resilience and Sustainability Task Force.
Second.
Moved by Granatowski, seconded by Heat. Discussion. You all have what my thoughts are in front of you. A lot of this is taken directly from circa documents that are out there. Tweaked it slightly to fit Groton, tweaked it a little bit more to fit what I wanted to, where I would like the direction for this to go. So all this would do is there would be a resolution written up, and then we would be voting on establishing a committee. Councilor Heath.
Just to clarify for the public, what is the committee doing? And also, I have many more than just 5 people who have approached me to ask to be on this.
Okay. So it's a Groton Resilience and Sustainability Task Force. The mission is to increase the resilience of Groton's vulnerable coast and inland waterways and to continue pursuing sustainability. A series of 6 bullet points, tasks, parameters that the task force would be charged with, and looking at 5 members. I know the last task force was quite large. I suppose we could tweak that if you wanted to. We could increase the number of members there. But this is a starting point for us. If you have questions or comments on it, I would say direct them to the manager over the course of the week before we draft the final resolution for the town council meeting. Anybody else? Comment, question, concern? Councilor Franco.
So this one, by any chance, be in competition or have overlay with the Conservation Committee?
No. It may have overlay as far as Conservation Commission being able to offer resources that they already have. This committee, I foresee it making use of lots of resources that are out there. In particular, Circa has offered much guidance, and we have people over there that are willing to offer us lots of information and assistance in getting things off the ground. There's a lot of, I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of stuff out there that we can take, and I want people to be able to sit and look at all that information and compile it and try to make it work for Groton.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilor Baumgartner.
Kind of in line with Councilor Heath talked about, I think it may be appropriate to increase the number of members on the committee to reflect maybe a wider array of each participants, reflect the diversity of the town. One recommendation I would have is maybe do it based on voting districts, so 1 from each voting district and 2 at large, so 9 in total, and then maybe from that pool you choose a chair and a vice chair.
Mr. Burke?
My only concern with district is you may have specialties of, multiple people within one district. In terms of numbering, in terms of about that number of people, I think that's probably about the right number of people.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with increasing the number, but I don't want to restrict who is on the commission because I want to be able to tap all the resources that we have. And we have quite a bit of expertise. And I would hate to have someone not be able to serve because we have an artificial guideline for where they are, right?
And also, just remind the people, if I could real quick, you don't have to be a member to attend the meetings, and more often than not, you're allowed to participate in, especially if you bring some particular specialty to the table.
Like to eat?
And
I love to eat.
Councilor Schmidt.
Did we want to include the plastics, the single-use bags and straws?
So that's something that can be decided, because if we get this off the ground, it can be included in what they are doing, what the task force is doing.
We're thinking that's going to be pretty easy, though. We're going to have a recommendation for you pretty fast here on that.
So then that'll probably be ready before this goes, because this has to go to council and everything. Yeah. So if you're interested in doing this and you have recommendations, please send them to Mr. Burt. So if there's is there further discussion? I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get you out of here. Okay. So then we'll call for a vote on 2019-140, Groton Resilience and Sustainability Task Force. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? So moved unanimously. Other business, I have something. We need Councilor Baumgartner is going to be stepping down from the seat board, so I'm going to be looking for a volunteer to serve as the town council rep on the seat Southeast Area Transit Authority Board. So if any of you are interested, if you could let me know, please, because we're going to be needing to appoint someone else due to his work commitments. It's not easy for him to get to those meetings now.
They're in the mornings. I think you're a perfect fit, man.
Me?
Did you have something, did you have other business?
Well, I just wanted to mention that I think it's the transportation.
Yes.
They're having a public meeting, and I think it's really important that we have somebody there to voice our concern, because I was talking with somebody from Avery Point, and their enrollment is down, and they think a lot of it is the problem of people getting there.
Okay.
So we really need somebody there to talk about EB, Pfizer, but definitely Avery Point.
Mr. Burt, do you have staff attending that?
I'll check, I'll make sure we have somebody there.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was in the paper, I can't remember.
Excuse me, I can't hear. Go ahead.
Does a representative have to be a counselor, or could you ask an RTM member?
We would like a counselor to be there. I believe we would like a counselor to be there. Certainly if no one steps up, then by all means, we will find someone else, but.
I don't, well, it should be. I mean, every member is either the municipal CEO or at the very least, involved in transportation. So considering Groton has 2 seats, I know the former town manager is the other representative, so it would behoove, I think, Groton to have an elected
I
member.
agree, an elected person from this time period rather than someone that is no longer serving the town. Councilor Heath?
I was just going to say this is part of the ad hoc, boards and commissions, so we'll have to look into that to see if it has to be a counselor. I'm not certain, I don't remember.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if I consider it, will you let us go home?
Thank you.
Yes. So Councilor Atwater is considering it. Thank you, Councilor Atwater. All right. So then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Adjournment? So moved.
Absolutely.
Moved by Schmidt, seconded by Franco. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining. We are adjourned at 10:25. Thank you very much.